In the quietest moment when the world has ceased its endless chatter, there comes a revelation. It arrives not with thunder or proclamation, but as a whisper so intimate, it seems to arise from within your very bones. This revelation, this knowing, is the foundation upon which all creation stands. Have you noticed how we search endlessly outside ourselves for that which has always resided within? How we journey across continents when the treasure map leads only to our own heart? This searching ends tonight, in this moment between us. Consciousness is the only reality, not a reality among many, but the singular substance from which all experience is woven. The world you perceive, with its endless variation and circumstance, is but a shadow cast by the light of your assumption. It has no independent existence. It lives because you live. It breathes because you breathe. It is because you are. When you close your eyes tonight, feeling the gentle weight of your body against the bed, remember that what appears so solid, so immovable in your waking hours is fluid as water in the realm of consciousness. The entire universe conspires to mirror what you have claimed as truth in the depths of your being. Many approach manifestation as something to be achieved through effort and strain. They believe they must bend reality through force of will, through endless affirmations spoken with clenched jaw and furrowed brow. But creation has never required struggle. The flower does not strain to bloom. The stars do not force their light through darkness. They simply express what they are, and so it is with you. You need not fight against what is, for what is exists only as reflection. Instead, assume what shall be. Feel the cool water of certainty washing through your body, carrying away doubt, dissolving resistance until nothing remains but calm knowing. Remember when you were a child playing in that twilight realm between waking and sleeping, how easily you slipped between realities, how naturally you assumed the identity of anything your heart desired. That fluidity of consciousness was not childish fantasy. It was profound wisdom you've since forgotten. Let us reclaim that wisdom now together as night enfolds us in its gentle embrace. Consider the last time you found yourself caught in worry about some future event. Perhaps it was a conversation, a presentation, a decision whose outcome seemed to hold your fate in balance. Feel again that tightness in your chest, that shallow breathing, that narrowing of possibility. Now notice how that worry created not just emotion but a whole world, a world where threat loomed large and your own capacity diminished. In those moments you were not simply thinking about a possible future, you were creating it, breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat by heartbeat. What if instead you had rested in a different assumption? What if you had allowed your body to feel the outcome already accomplished, already perfect, not as hope or wish but as memory, as fact? This is not positive thinking, this is not affirmation. This is the recognition of your true nature as the operant power in your universe. Creation is finished. All possible states exist now. Your journey is not to make anything happen but to step into the version of reality where your desire already breathes and moves and has its being. As you listen to these words, perhaps a part of you stirs in recognition. Perhaps something ancient awakens, something that has always known the truth of what I share. This recognition may come as warmth spreading through your chest, as tingling along your spine, as tears gathering without explanation. Welcome these sensations. They are not emotional reactions to words but your being's response to truth. They are the compass pointing home. The world will tell you that circumstances create your feelings, that events determine your state. But I tell you that your state creates circumstances. Your feeling creates events. The universe is not happening to you. It is happening from you. Tonight, as you drift between waking and sleeping, I invite you to try something so simple it may seem insignificant. Yet in this simplicity lies the power that creates worlds. Feel yourself now as the person who already possesses that which you desire, not wanting it, not working toward it, not deserving it, but being it. Let this feeling permeate every cell. Let it inform your breathing. Let it relax your face into the expression it would naturally hold if your wish were already fulfilled. Do not strain for this feeling. Do not manufacture it. Simply allow it to arise as you would allow sleep to come, through gentle permission, through soft surrender. For what you seek also seeks you. What you long to become longs for your recognition. Between these twin desires, yours and creation's, there is no distance at all, only the illusion of separation. Rest here in this knowing. Rest as the ocean rests in its depths, undisturbed by the waves that play upon its surface. Rest as the sky rests, unchanged by the clouds that pass through its vastness. You are that ocean. You are that sky. Boundless, eternal, complete. The revelation has always been within you, waiting only for the moment when your listening became deep enough to hear it. That moment is now. That moment is always now. As the night deepens around us, let us journey beyond what the physical senses perceive, beyond the boundaries of sight and sound, beyond the limitations of touch and taste and smell. There exists a realm more real, more substantial than the world we navigate by day. This realm, this living, breathing dimension of pure potential, is not distant from you. It is not separated by space or time. It exists within you as surely as your heartbeat, as intimately as your next breath. Consider how we've been taught to trust only what our eyes can see, our hands can touch. From earliest childhood, we learn to dismiss the whispers of intuition, to doubt the knowing that comes without evidence. We are trained to believe that reality is fixed, immutable, existing independent of our perception. Yet what if this solid world is but the final stage of creation, not its source? What if everything you see began first as invisible impulse, as imagination made manifest? The chair upon which you sit was once only an idea in the mind of its creator. The room that surrounds you existed first as concept, then as blueprint, before a single wall was raised. Even your body, with its miraculous complexity, grew from invisible information, from a code too small for the eye to perceive. Everything visible emerges from the invisible. Everything physical bursts from the metaphysical. This is not mysticism. It is the most fundamental process of creation. As you listen, perhaps resting with eyes closed, become aware of how your attention habitually moves outward, constantly scanning the external for confirmation, for validation, for evidence. Notice how rarely it turns inward, to the realm where all creation begins. Tonight, I invite you to reverse this flow, to turn the arrow of awareness back toward its source, to recognize that what you seek externally can only be found within. Imagine now a garden, lush with possibility. This garden exists not in some distant place, but within your own consciousness. Its soil is the fertile ground of your awareness. Its light is your attention. Its water, your belief. In this inner garden grow the seeds of everything you have ever desired, and everything you will ever experience. Some seeds lie dormant, waiting for the perfect conditions to sprout. Others have grown into magnificent trees, bearing fruit that nourishes your external life. What determines which seeds flourish and which remain unmanifest? Not chance, not fate, but the quality of your assumption, the unwavering certainty with which you water particular possibilities with your belief. You see, your consciousness is not merely a passive witness to reality. It is the very substance from which reality is formed. Just as the artist's medium takes the shape of their vision, so does the substance of life conform to your deepest assumptions. Feel how radical this understanding is. Feel how it liberates you from victimhood, from circumstance, from limitation. Feel how it places the creative power exactly where it has always belonged, within you. Perhaps you're wondering if this is true. Why don't my desires manifest instantly? Why does the world seem so resistant to my wishes? Why do circumstances appear to have such power over my experience? The answer lies not in the nature of reality, but in the divided nature of your own consciousness. Part of you knows the truth of what I share. Another part clings to the evidence of the senses, to the testimony of past experience, to the collective agreement about what is possible. This division creates a state of uncertainty, a wavering between states, and creation, like a mirror, reflects this very wavering back to you as inconsistent results, as manifestations that come and go, as desires fulfilled and then lost again. The key, then, is not to increase your effort, but to unify your consciousness, to bring all parts of yourself into alignment with your chosen assumption, to become single-minded, not through force but through loving integration. Tonight, as you rest on the threshold of sleep, I invite you to practice this unification. Choose one desire, one state you wish to embody. It might be abundance, it might be health, it might be a particular relationship or achievement. The content matters less than the process. Now, instead of picturing this desire as something external to obtain, feel yourself as someone who already embodies it. Feel how your body would feel if this were your reality. Notice your posture, your breathing, the expression on your face. Notice the quiet confidence that comes not from hoping but from knowing. If doubts arise, and they will, for the mind is trained to question, do not fight them, do not resist them. Simply observe them with compassion, understanding that they are not truth but habit. They are echoes of an old paradigm, shadows that dissolve when exposed to the light of your new awareness. Remember, what you're practicing is not self-deception. You are not trying to convince yourself of something untrue. Rather, you are aligning with a truth that exists beyond physical evidence, the truth that consciousness precedes form, that assumption precedes experience. The world you see tomorrow will reflect the assumptions you embody tonight, not as punishment or reward but as law, as the natural extension of consciousness into form. Rest in this knowing, this remembrance of your true creative power. Rest as the gardener rests, having planted seeds with care and certainty, knowing that the invisible processes of growth are already underway beneath the surface. Beyond the visible lies the realm of infinite possibility. Beyond what has been lies what can be. Beyond who you have known yourself to be lies who you truly are. Creator, not creature. Cause, not effect. The very substance from which worlds are born. There exists within you a hunger that no physical sustenance can satisfy. You have felt it. That quiet ache that persists even in moments of apparent fulfillment. that longing that whispers beneath the noise of daily living, that reaching for something you cannot name but recognize as essential to your completion. Many spend their lives trying to silence this hunger. They fill their days with endless activity, their homes with possessions, their minds with information, hoping that somewhere in this accumulation the ache will subside. Yet it persists, doesn't it? It remains, sometimes as subtle whisper, sometimes as urgent cry, but always present. Tonight I invite you to consider a radical possibility. What if this hunger is not a flaw in your design, but its most perfect expression? What if it is not emptiness seeking to be filled, but divinity seeking to be expressed? For desire, true desire that arises from the depths of your being, is not mere wanting. It is not craving or attachment or grasping. It is the voice of your larger self calling you toward expansion. It is life seeking greater expression through the unique vessel that is you. And God said, in him I shall be returned and renewed. The divine impulse within you speaks through the language of desire. It says, through this longing I shall experience myself anew. Through this yearning I shall know myself in yet another form. Consider the seed beneath the soil. What compels it to break its shell, to push upward through darkness, to reach toward light it has never seen but somehow knows? This compulsion is not separate from the hunger you feel. It is the same force, life expanding toward its fullest expression. You have been taught to distrust desire, haven't you? To view it with suspicion as something to be controlled, moderated, even denied. The spiritual traditions of the world often speak of desire as the root of suffering, as the obstacle to peace. And yes, when desire arises from lack, from the belief that you are incomplete without something external, it does create suffering. It does become a chain that binds rather than wings that lift. But there is another kind of desire, one that springs not from perceived absence but from the fullness of your being. This desire does not say, I am empty without this. It says, through this experience I may know myself more fully. Through this creation I may express yet another facet of my infinite nature. Feel the difference between these two forms of longing. One contracts, creates tension, demands. The other expands, creates flow, invites. One is rooted in fear of not having, of not being enough. The other is rooted in the joy of giving, of allowing more of yourself to become visible. The hunger within you, when embraced, when understood, is the very engine of creation. It is divine discontent, the sacred restlessness that has driven every advancement, every art, every expansion of consciousness throughout human history. When you honor this hunger, when you listen to its guidance without shame or fear, you align yourself with the creative force of the universe. You become a conscious participant in your own evolution. Tonight, as you rest in that place between waking and dreaming, I invite you to place your hand upon your heart. Feel its steady rhythm beneath your palm, and in that physical pulse recognize another rhythm, the pulse of desire that moves through you, that has always moved through you. What does this deeper hunger ask of you? Not what you think you should want, not what others have told you to pursue, but what calls to you from the very center of your being. What feels like coming home when you imagine it? Perhaps it's a creative expression that has waited patiently for your recognition. Perhaps it's a way of living that honors your unique gifts. Perhaps it's a quality of presence you long to embody. Whatever form it takes, this desire is the blueprint of your becoming. Now here is the secret that transforms desire from source of suffering to vehicle of manifestation. You must recognize that what you hunger for already exists within you. The very capacity to desire something is evidence of its presence in your consciousness. You cannot truly desire what is foreign to your nature. You cannot genuinely hunger for what does not in some sense already belong to you. Your desires are not random. They are not imposed from without. They are the call of your own unexpressed potential, seeking recognition, seeking form. When you say, I desire this experience, what you're really saying is, I am ready to express this aspect of myself. I am ready to know myself as this. Feel how this understanding transforms your relationship with desire. It is no longer about chasing, grasping, acquiring something outside yourself. It is about allowing what is already within to flow outward into expression. It is about becoming what you already are. The writers of Scripture understood this truth. Before you call, I will answer. Your desire is not the beginning of creation. It is the recognition of what has already been created, what already exists in the realm of pure potential, awaiting your assumption to clothe it in physical form. As you drift towards sleep tonight, I invite you to reimagine one desire that has lived within you. See it not as something to attain, but as something to express. Feel it not as absence, but as presence seeking fuller embodiment. Say to this desire, I recognize you as part of me. I acknowledge you as my own unexpressed fullness. I give you permission to become visible in my life. Then, having made this recognition, release the how, release the when, release the need to control the process of manifestation. For the bridge between desire and fulfillment is not built through effort, but through surrender to the wisdom that already knows the way. The hunger within you is holy. It is the stirring of life itself, seeking greater expression through the miracle that is you. Honor it, listen to it, follow where it leads. For in the fulfillment of your deepest desires lies the revelation of who you truly are and have always been. Between you and the life you yearn to live stands a subtle barrier. Not circumstance, not time, not others' actions, but something far more intimate and yet often unrecognized. This barrier, this veil that seems to separate desire from manifestation, is resistance. Resistance wears many faces. Sometimes it appears as doubt, whispering that what you seek is beyond your reach. Sometimes as unworthiness, suggesting you haven't earned the right to receive. Sometimes as fear, painting scenarios of loss should you actually attain your desire. And sometimes most subtly as attachment to struggle itself, the belief that creation must involve strain, that manifestation must be difficult. Tonight, as the quiet of evening creates space for deeper awareness, I invite you to explore this resistance not as enemy but as messenger. For in its persistent presence lies valuable information about the divided nature of your consciousness. Consider how often we live in contradiction. The conscious mind affirms, I am abundant, I am worthy, I am loved. Yet beneath this affirmation runs a countercurrent. But what if I'm not? What if I fail? What if I'm rejected? This division creates a state of vibrational confusion. Like trying to drive with one foot on the accelerator and one on the brake, you remain stationary despite the engine's roar. Energy expends, yet movement halts. The universe, you see, responds not to your words, not to your conscious intentions, but to your state, to the quality of energy you embody. And when that state is divided, creation itself becomes confused about what to manifest in your experience. How then do we dissolve this resistance? Not through force, not through struggle against it. For what we resist persists. What we fight, we strengthen. What we deny, we empower. Instead, dissolution comes through gentle acknowledgement, through compassionate awareness, through the light of consciousness itself shining upon what has remained in shadow. Begin by recognizing that resistance is not failure. It is not evidence of your lack of spiritual understanding or manifestation skill. It is simply the mind's natural response to perceived threat, and change, even desired change, registers as threat to the part of you responsible for maintaining safety and consistency. This part, call it the protective self, believes it keeps you safe by maintaining the known, even when the known brings pain. It resists the new not out of malice, but out of love. Misguided perhaps, but love nonetheless. When you understand this, resistance transforms from obstacle to ally. It becomes a map, showing you exactly where healing is needed, exactly where limiting beliefs have created constriction in the free flow of your creative energy. Tonight I invite you to dialogue with your resistance, not to overcome it, not to battle against it, but to listen to its concerns, with the compassion you would offer a frightened child. Find a quiet moment. Close your eyes. Bring to mind one desire that feels somehow blocked, one intention that has not yet manifested despite your conscious focus. Now gently inquire, what within me opposes this creation? What fears arise when I imagine this desire fulfilled? Let the answers come without judgment. They may arrive as words, as images, as bodily sensations. They may surprise you with their content or their intensity. Welcome them all as guests bearing important messages. Perhaps you'll discover that abundance feels threatening because part of you associates it with responsibility you don't feel ready to shoulder. Perhaps health seems somehow unsafe because illness has become a familiar identity. Perhaps love appears risky because past vulnerability led to pain. These discoveries are not failures. They are revelations, the first step toward integration, toward bringing all parts of yourself into alignment with your desire. Once you've listened deeply to the resistance, you can begin the gentle work of reassurance. Speak to these protective parts not with frustration, but with gratitude. Thank you for trying to keep me safe. I honor your intention. I recognize your love. Then offer new information. What once brought danger no longer exists. What once seemed impossible is now within reach. We are safe to expand. We are safe to receive. We are safe to become more fully who we are. This inner dialogue may feel unusual at first, perhaps even uncomfortable. We are not taught to relate to ourselves with such tenderness, such attention. Yet it is through precisely this dialogue that fragmentation becomes wholeness, that resistance dissolves into flow. Remember, the goal is not to eliminate parts of yourself deemed problematic. It is to bring all aspects of consciousness into harmony, into shared purpose. For manifestation flows most powerfully not from partial self, but from whole self, from the unified field of your being. As resistance begins to soften through this compassionate attention, you may notice subtle shifts in your physical body. Breathing deepens, muscles relax, a sense of spaciousness replaces constriction. These bodily changes are not incidental but fundamental to the process of manifestation. For the body is the densest part of your consciousness, the place where energy becomes most visible. When the body relaxes its armor, energy flows more freely. When energy flows more freely, new possibilities emerge in your experience. What seemed impossible yesterday becomes probable today, inevitable tomorrow. This dissolving of resistance is not a one-time event, but an ongoing practice, a constant gentle turning toward what arises within, a persistent choosing of integration over fragmentation, of wholeness over division. And here is the beautiful paradox. The very resistance you once fought against becomes, when embraced with awareness, the gateway to your freedom. The very fears that seem to block manifestation become, when met with compassion, the alchemical elements of your transformation. As you drift towards sleep tonight, I invite you to practice this gentle art of dissolution. Feel where in your body resistance lives as tension, as constriction, as armoring. Breathe into these places, send them light, send them love, invite them to soften, to release, to surrender to the larger wisdom of your being. And as you do, feel how manifestation becomes not a battle to be won, but a flowering to be allowed. Feel how creation shifts from effort to grace, from pushing to permitting, from making to revealing what has always been present within you. For when resistance dissolves, what remains is not emptiness but fullness, the natural state of your being, unobstructed, free to express its inherent abundance, its limitless capacity for joy, for creation, for love. This is the secret the mystics have always known, that the poets have sung, that the sages have embodied. The kingdom is not to be stormed, but entered with the innocence of a child. The door is not to be broken but gently opened from within, and you hold the key. You have always held it, in the tender attention you bring to all that arises within you, in the loving embrace of even those parts that seem to oppose your desires, in the quiet certainty that beneath all appearance of division lies the indivisible wholeness of your true nature. In the silence of this moment, become aware of a conversation that never ceases. It continues whether you're awake or asleep, whether you're focused or distracted, whether you acknowledge its presence or not. This conversation, this constant exchange between aspects of your own consciousness, creates the template from which your entire life unfolds. I speak of the inner conversation, that stream of thoughts, images, assumptions, and beliefs that flows through the field of your awareness day and night. Most live their entire lives never recognizing the creative power of this internal dialogue. They believe themselves victims of circumstance, never suspecting that circumstance itself is but the outer picturing of their own mental activity. Let us listen for a moment to this conversation as it typically unfolds. Notice how it shifts between past and future, rarely resting in the present. Notice how it rehearses worry, replays disappointment, anticipates difficulty. Notice how it compares your life to others, judges your progress as insufficient, questions your worthiness of desire. This is not to cultivate self-criticism. It is to bring awareness to what has operated largely in darkness. For what remains unconscious remains in control. The inner conversation is neither good nor bad. It is simply creative, like the soil that receives whatever seed is planted, making no distinction between flower and weed. Your consciousness gives form to whatever you impress upon it through sustained inner dialogue. When you understand this, truly understand it, you recognize that the key to transformation lies not in manipulating external conditions, but in revising the conversation that precedes those conditions. Consider the last time you faced challenge. Perhaps it was financial strain, physical discomfort, relationship tension. In the privacy of your mind, what conversation did you have about this situation? Did you speak of catastrophe, of unworthiness, of things worsening? Or did you speak of temporary adjustment, of growth through challenge, of the perfect resolution already secured though not yet visible? The quality of this inner dialogue determined not just your emotional response to circumstance, but the very evolution of that circumstance in your experience. For creation flows from the inside out, never the reverse. Tonight I invite you to become not just aware of your inner conversation, but deliberate in its direction. This is not about forcing positive thinking or denying authentic feeling. It is about recognizing the creative power of your attention and choosing with awareness what you will energize through that attention. Begin with this understanding. Every moment offers infinite conversational possibilities. You can speak of lack or abundance, limitation or expansion, fear or love. No external authority dictates which you must choose. This freedom, this sovereignty over your own mental activity, is your divine inheritance. Now choose one area of life where you desire change. It might be health, relationship, creative expression, material well-being. Whatever the sphere, bring awareness to the conversation you typically have about it. Not to judge but to witness with clarity. What tone characterizes this conversation? What assumptions underlie it? What beliefs about yourself, about life, about possibility does it reveal? Again, this inquiry is not about criticism but illumination. bringing into consciousness what has operated in shadow. Having witnessed the existing conversation, you are free to choose anew. This choosing is your creative act. It is the planting of a different seed, one that will grow by law into corresponding external experience. What would love say about this situation? What would wisdom whisper? What would the version of you who already embodies the desired state know with certainty? Allow this new conversation to form within you. Feel its texture, its vibration, its resonance with deeper truth. Then, with deliberate intent, begin to live from this conversation. Let it inform your thoughts upon waking. Let it color your feelings as you move through your day. Let it be the lens through which you interpret events, the foundation from which you respond to circumstances. Remember, revision of the inner conversation is not about denial of what appears to be. It is about recognition of what lies beneath appearance, the causal realm of consciousness from which all form emerges. When circumstance seems to contradict your chosen conversation, as it will during transition, do not abandon the new for the familiar. Do not revert to speaking of limitation simply because limitation still appears in your experience. This apparent contradiction is simply the time lag between cause and effect, between inner shift and outer manifestation. Stand firm in your new assumption. Continue the conversation that aligns with your desire, rather than your history. For history is simply solidified conversation, the crystallization of past mental patterns. It holds no power over your now except the power you grant through continued inner agreement with its reality. This firmness, this unwavering maintenance of the chosen conversation despite temporary appearance, is what Scripture refers to as faith. Not blind belief but the understanding that causes precede effects, that inner determines outer, that consciousness molds circumstance with the precision of an artist shaping clay. As you rest tonight at the threshold of sleep, I invite you to practice this deliberate inner conversation. Choose words that resonate with the fulfilled state. Speak to yourself as one who already possesses what you desire. Converse with life as one who knows its abundant nature, its responsiveness to your consciousness, its perfect reflection of your dominant assumptions. Feel how this conversation creates a new vibrational signature within you. Feel how it relaxes the body, calms the emotions, clarifies the mind. Feel how it aligns you with the version of reality, where your desire already exists as present fact. This alignment is not wishful thinking. It is the most practical application of universal law. The law that states consciousness is cause, experience is effect. The law that promises, it is done unto you as you believe. The law that assures, as within so without. The inner conversation is your point of power. It is the creative edge where potential becomes actual, where invisible becomes visible, where spirit takes form. Guard it with awareness, direct it with intention, maintain it with unwavering conviction. For as surely as spring follows winter, as surely as dawn follows night, the outer must conform to the inner, the visible must reflect the invisible, the world must rearrange itself to match the conversation you hold consistently in the chamber of your consciousness. This is not magic. This is not supernatural intervention. This is simply the mechanics of manifestation, the technology of consciousness creating form. It has always been this way, whether recognized or not. The only difference now is your conscious participation in the process. Speak within of abundance, and watch lack dissolve. Speak within of health, and watch limitation fade. Speak within of love, and watch barriers between hearts crumble. Not as miracle but as law, not as exception but as rule. The inner conversation creates the outer world. Change the conversation, change the creation. This simplicity is your power. This understanding is your freedom. As twilight softens into night, let us explore together a concept both ancient and revolutionary. A principle that when fully embodied transforms manifestation from struggle to natural expression. I speak of living from the end, the art of occupying in consciousness the state you desire to experience in physical reality. This principle reverses our habitual approach to creation. Typically, we work from cause to effect, from effort to result, from present limitation toward future attainment. We say, when I have this, then I will feel that. When circumstances change, then I will embody peace, confidence, fulfillment. Living from the end invites a radical shift in this sequence. It asks us to experience first in consciousness what we seek to manifest in form, to feel the fulfillment before the external conditions align, to assume the state of the wish fulfilled even while physical senses testify to its absence. This is not pretending. This is not fooling yourself. This is recognizing the true order of creation, that consciousness precedes form, that inner experience shapes outer reality, that what you assume as real within must, by universal law, be projected as experience without. Consider how we typically navigate desire. We identify what we want, perhaps greater abundance, vibrant health, meaningful relationship. We then construct a series of steps, a bridge of actions meant to carry us from current lack to future fulfillment. We focus on the gap between where we stand and be, and in this focus on absence, on the not yet, we inadvertently create more of the same lack we seek to transcend. Living from the end dissolves this pattern. It closes the gap not through external arrangement but through internal assumption. It says the version of reality where your desire is fulfilled already exists. Your task is not to create it but to shift your consciousness into alignment with it. To live as if what you seek is already yours. To feel the feelings, think the thoughts, embody the state of that fulfilled reality now. This subtle shift from working toward to living from activates creative forces beyond the conscious mind's capacity to orchestrate. It engages what William Blake called the divine imagination, that aspect of consciousness which shapes worlds through pure conception, through the feeling tone of completed manifestation. How then do we practice this principle in the quiet moments before sleep, in the sacred space between our days? Begin by clarifying your desire not as vague wanting but as specific state of being. Ask yourself, how would I feel if this desire were already fulfilled? What thoughts would naturally arise? How would my body move, my voice sound, my energy flow? What inner conversations would I have with myself? How would I interact with others? These questions shift attention from external conditions to internal states. They recognize that what you truly seek is never the thing itself but the experience of being the person who has that thing, who lives that reality. Now, having clarified this state, step into it fully in imagination, not as future possibility but as present fact. Close your eyes and experience with all your senses, with your entire being, the reality where your desire is fulfilled. Feel the texture of that reality, its colors, sounds, scents, textures. Feel how your body rests differently in this state. Notice how your breathing changes, how tension dissolves, how certainty replaces doubt. This sensory richness, this embodied knowing, is what distinguishes living from the end from mere visualization or affirmation. In this state, you're not creating mental pictures of what might be. You're stepping into a vibrational frequency that already exists, allowing it to become your dominant tone, your natural residence. As you practice this immersion, you may notice resistance arise. The habitual mind, accustomed to creating from lack, may interrupt with doubts. But this isn't true yet. I'm just making this up. Nothing has actually changed. When these thoughts emerge, recognize them not as reality checks but as remnants of an old paradigm, echoes of a consciousness trained to create from outside in rather than inside out. Don't fight these thoughts. Don't judge yourself for having them. Simply return gently but firmly to the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Remember, the external has not yet reorganized to match your new internal state, because manifestation unfolds in sequence, first in consciousness, then in experience. The time gap between inner acceptance and outer appearance is what tests faith, not faith in external forces, but faith in the creative principle itself, in the absolute law that consciousness is causal. Throughout your day, create small moments to return to this state. Let it become familiar territory, a home you visit with increasing frequency until you no longer need conscious effort to dwell there. When circumstances seem to contradict your assumption, resist the temptation to abandon the end for the present appearance. Instead, see the current reality as shadow, as echo, as the passing remnant of previous states of consciousness. Living from the end requires a willingness to embrace what Neville called the naturalness of the state. If abundance is your desire, you must become someone to whom abundance feels natural, deserved, appropriate, not exceptional or temporary. If relationship is your focus, you must become someone to whom love feels normal, expected, inevitable, not rare or precious. This naturalness dissolves the emotional charge around manifestation. It removes the desperate energy of wanting, the anxious vibration of seeking, replacing them with the calm certainty of having. And in this certainty, this absence of energetic contradiction, physical manifestation becomes not miracle but natural expression of aligned consciousness. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, that magical state where conscious and subconscious mind meet in perfect harmony, choose one desire and live from its fulfillment. Feel it as accomplished fact, rest in it as present reality, sleep in the assumption of its completion, knowing that as you do, invisible forces rearrange the substance of your world to match this new vibrational signature. For when you live from the end, you collapse time. You recognize that the distance between desire and fulfillment exists not in external space but in consciousness itself. Close that gap within, and the without must follow, not as exception but as law, not as intervention but as principle. The end already exists. Your task is not to create it but to occupy it, to embody it, to become it. For in becoming, you unleash the creative power that has always been yours, the power to shape reality through the quality of your assumption, through the unwavering certainty of your inner knowing. There exists a state of consciousness so powerful, so transformative, that when embodied it accelerates manifestation beyond anything effort could achieve. This state, this subtle but profound shift in energy is what we might call divine indifference. To understand this state, we must first recognize what it is not. Divine indifference is not apathy. It is not resignation. It is not giving up on desires or pretending not to care about outcomes. It is something far more nuanced, far more powerful. A quality of consciousness that knows the fulfillment of desires so completely that attachment to external confirmation dissolves entirely. Think of the last time you intensely wanted something. Perhaps it was recognition, relationship, material comfort. Remember the energy of that wanting, how it consumed attention, created tension, generated a constant checking of circumstances for evidence of progress. This state of consciousness, this hungry, grasping energy, actually pushes away the very thing you seek to attract. Why? Because embedded within intense wanting is the vibration of absence. To want something desperately is to declare to the universe, this thing is not here. This thing is separate from me. This thing is difficult to attain. And the creative principle, responding with perfect precision to your dominant vibration, manifests exactly that experience, continued separation from your desire. Divine indifference creates an entirely different energetic signature. It says, I know this desire is already fulfilled in consciousness, therefore I need not anxiously await its appearance in form. I need not manipulate circumstances to make it happen. I need not worry about when or how it will manifest. I rest in absolute certainty of its expression in perfect timing. This certainty, this peaceful knowing, emits a vibrational frequency that allows rather than obstructs the natural flow of manifestation. It creates a clear channel through which desire can move from potential to actual, from conceived to perceived. Notice how different this energy feels in your body. Where desperate wanting creates contraction, divine indifference creates expansion. Where attachment generates anxiety, divine indifference fosters peace. Where forcing creates resistance, divine indifference allows flow. You have experienced this state, though perhaps without recognizing its manifestation power. Think of something you now have that you once desired intensely, perhaps a relationship, a position, a home. Remember how the shift occurred. At some point the anxious wanting transformed into something else, a quiet knowing, a release of struggle, a surrender to timing beyond your control. And often it was precisely at this moment, this point of energetic shift from grasping to allowing, that external circumstances rearranged to bring your desire into form. This was not coincidence. It was law in action, the law that states consciousness precedes experience, that vibration determines manifestation. Divine indifference operates from a profound understanding. What is yours cannot be kept from you. What belongs in your experience must come to you. The only variable is timing, and that timing is determined not by external forces, but by the alignment of your energy with the energy of your desire. How then do we cultivate this state of powerful allowing? Not through effort, not through trying to be indifferent, for trying creates its own tension, its own vibration of lack. Instead, divine indifference arises naturally from a shift in perspective, from recognition of a larger truth. This truth is simple yet revolutionary. Your desires are not random. They are not imposed from without. They arise from the deepest part of your being, the part connected to infinite intelligence, to the creative force itself. Therefore, the very presence of desire is evidence of its fulfillment in consciousness. The seed contains the flower. The acorn contains the oak. Your desire contains its manifestation. When you truly understand this, not intellectually but viscerally, not as concept but as felt reality, divine indifference becomes your natural state. You no longer need to force or struggle or manipulate. You simply rest in the assurance that what has been conceived in consciousness must, by universal law, be expressed in experience. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, I invite you to practice this quality of consciousness. Identify one desire that has created tension through attachment to outcome, through anxiety about manifestation. Now gently shift perspective. See this desire not as something external to acquire, but as something internal already possessed. Feel how this shift changes your breathing, relaxes your body, calms your energy. Feel how it transforms wanting into having, seeking into finding, absence into presence. Then, having made this shift, release even the need to maintain it. Let go of trying to feel a particular way about your desire. Simply rest in the knowing that what is yours must come to you, that what belongs in your experience cannot be kept from your experience, that what resonates with your true nature must manifest in your reality. This releasing, this divine surrender, is not weakness but strength. It is not giving up control but recognizing a higher order of control, one that operates not through personal will but through alignment with universal principle. As you drift towards sleep, notice how differently your body feels in this state of divine indifference. Notice how the subtle anxiety that often accompanies desire has dissolved into peaceful certainty. Notice how the need to make things happen has transformed into willingness to let things unfold. This state, this energetic signature, is the most powerful manifestation frequency available to you. It combines the clarity of intention with the openness of surrender. It holds both the specificity of desire and the flexibility of timing. It knows what but releases how and when. In this releasing, you create space for wisdom beyond the conscious mind, to orchestrate circumstances in ways far more elegant, far more perfect than personal effort could arrange. You allow the universe to conspire in your favor, to align resources, opportunities, connections in service to your conscious intention. Divine indifference is the flower that has released attachment to the sun, yet continues to turn its face toward warmth. It is the bird that has released anxiety about flight, yet spreads its wings in perfect trust. It is the river that has released concern about the path, yet flows with absolute certainty toward the sea. Become this flower, this bird, this river. Hold your desire clearly in consciousness, while releasing all tension around its manifestation. Know with quiet certainty that what has been conceived must be expressed, that what has been assumed must be experienced, that what has been claimed in consciousness must appear in form. And in this knowing, this peaceful, powerful knowing, feel how manifestation transforms from effort to grace, from making to allowing, from pursuing to receiving the gift that has always been yours, that could never have been kept from you, that was destined for your experience from the moment it arose as impulse in your awareness. Divine indifference, the paradoxical state that cares deeply yet holds lightly, that knows completely yet strives not at all, that remains specific in intention yet flexible in expression. Rest here in this perfect balance of clarity and surrender. Rest as creation itself rests, utterly certain of its power, absolutely trusting in its process, completely aligned with the pure joy of expression. In the depths of your consciousness exists a version of you untouched by circumstance, unchanged by experience, unmoved by the constant flux of external conditions. This self, this core identity, does not vacillate between confidence and doubt, between certainty and fear, between faith and disbelief. It remains steadfast, immovable, complete. We might call this the unshakable self, the aspect of your being that knows desire is already fulfilled, that recognizes abundance as natural state, that experiences perfection as present reality rather than future possibility. Most live their entire lives unaware of this self, identifying instead with the reactive mind that shifts like weather, the emotional body that flows like tide, the physical form that changes with time. They say, I am anxious, I am confused, I am uncertain, mistaking temporary states for fundamental identity. Tonight I invite you to recognize yourself as something far greater, far more stable than these passing conditions. For the unshakable self is not something to be created or achieved. It is what remains when all that is temporary, all that is reactive, all that is conditioned falls away. This recognition, this remembrance of your true nature, is the foundation of unwavering assumption. For how can you assume a state with certainty if the assuming self constantly vacillates? How can you maintain a vision with clarity if the viewing self continuously shifts position? How can you embody a feeling with consistency if the feeling self regularly changes allegiance? The answer lies not in forcing stability, but in recognizing the stability that already exists beneath the surface movements of consciousness. Not in creating an unshakable self, but in identifying with the unshakable self that has always been present, always been available, always been your truest nature. Consider how we typically approach manifestation. We identify a desired state, perhaps confidence, perhaps abundance, perhaps relationship, and then attempt to assume it through mental effort, through emotional manipulation, through physical adjustment. We try to feel what we do not yet feel, to think what we do not yet think, to be what we do not yet recognize ourselves to be. This approach creates inner division, subtle conflict between aspect of self that knows lack and aspect of self trying to know fulfillment. And in this division, this contradiction, this internal argument, manifestation power diminishes. What if instead you approach creation from the unshakable self? What if you recognize that beneath all passing states of consciousness exists a self that already embodies completeness, that already knows fulfillment, that already experiences the perfection you seek to manifest? This shift from creating states to recognizing states, from becoming to remembering, from attaining to allowing, transforms manifestation from effort to expression, from struggle to natural flow. How do we access this unshakable self in practical terms? Not through technique but through surrender of identification with that which shakes. Not through acquiring something new but through releasing what is false. Begin by observing, with gentle awareness, how easily you identify with temporary states of consciousness. Notice how readily you say, I am tired, I am worried, I am confused, as if these passing conditions constituted your essential nature. Now experiment with a subtle shift in language, both inner and outer. Instead of I am anxious, try I notice anxiety passing through my awareness. Instead of I am doubtful, try I observe doubt arising in consciousness. This simple adjustment creates space between the observing self and the observed state, between the unchanging awareness and the changing content of awareness. In this space, this gap between witness and experience, the unshakable self reveals itself, not as concept but as felt reality, not as something to attain but as what remains when identification with the temporary falls away. From this space, assumption takes on entirely new quality. You are no longer trying to force yourself into states that feel foreign, to convince yourself of realities that seem distant. Instead, you recognize that all states already exist within your consciousness, and your creative act is simply choosing which to energize with attention, which to occupy with awareness. This choosing becomes not effort but recognition, not strain but remembrance, not becoming but allowing what has always been true to express itself through your particular consciousness. The unshakable self knows no separation between desire and fulfillment. It experiences no gap between intention and manifestation. It recognizes no distance between current reality and desired state. From its perspective, all exists now, all possibilities, all expressions, all experiences, and creation is simply the act of directing attention to the particular expression you wish to energize in this moment. Tonight, as you rest in the twilight state between waking and sleeping, I invite you to practice identification with this unshakable core. Begin by bringing awareness to the part of you that observes all experience without becoming any experience, the part that witnesses thoughts without becoming thoughts, that notices emotions without becoming emotions, that perceives sensations without becoming sensations. Rest in this witnessing awareness. Feel its vastness, its stability, its unchanging nature amidst the constant flow of consciousness content. This witness, this observer of all that arises, is the threshold of the unshakable self. Now from this witnessing awareness, bring to mind one desire, one intention, one state you wish to manifest in experience. But rather than trying to assume this state as if it was separate from you, recognize it as already present within the field of your consciousness, not as future possibility, but as current reality available for expression. Feel how different this approach is from typical manifestation practice. Feel how it dissolves struggle, eliminates contradiction, resolves the subtle conflict that occurs when part of you knows lack while another part tries to know fulfillment. The unshakable self experiences all is present, all is available, all is already accomplished in the realm where creation begins. From this self you do not need to convince yourself of anything. You do not need to talk yourself into new states. You do not need to force feeling or manipulate emotion. You simply recognize what has always been true beneath the surface fluctuations of consciousness, that you are not becoming but remembering, not acquiring but revealing, not creating anew but allowing what has always existed to emerge into expression. And in this recognition, this remembrance, this allowing, manifestation transforms from arduous journey to simple choice, from distant goal to present reality, from future attainment to current revelation. The unshakable self knows no postponement. It experiences no delay. It recognizes no gap between conception and birth, between impulse and expression, between desire and fulfillment. From its perspective, time itself is not linear progression, but simultaneous existence of all possibilities. And your creative act is simply choosing which of these possibilities to energize with awareness in this eternal moment. Rest in this knowing as you drift towards sleep. Feel how it releases the anxious energy of becoming, the striving quality of attaining, the effortful nature of creating. Feel how it replaces these with the calm certainty of recognition, the quiet power of remembrance, the peaceful knowing of revelation. For when you live from the unshakable self, manifestation is not arduous process, but natural expression. Creation is not making but revealing. Becoming is not journey, but revelation of what has always been your truest, deepest, most authentic nature. This is the foundation of unwavering assumption, identification not with the self that vacillates, but with the self that knows, not with the consciousness that questions but with the consciousness that affirms, not with the awareness that seeks but with the awareness that finds all it desires already present within its own infinite nature. There exists a quality of consciousness more powerful than any technique, more effective than any method, more transformative than any practice. This quality, this subtle but profound state of being, is what we might call silent knowing. Silent knowing is not intellectual understanding. It is not mental agreement with concept or principle. It is not even belief, however strong or sincere. It is something far deeper, far more fundamental. A wordless certainty that resides not in thought but in the very cells of your being, not in mind but in the substance of consciousness itself. When you embody this state, manifestation requires no effort. Creation demands no struggle. Transformation needs no force. For silent knowing is not something you do but something you are. The natural radiation of consciousness that recognizes itself as source rather than effect, as creator rather than creation. Most approach manifestation as complex process requiring specific steps, particular methods, exact sequences. They study techniques, memorize affirmations, practice visualizations, thinking that if they perform these outer activities correctly, inner transformation will follow. But silent knowing reverses this sequence. It recognizes that inner state precedes outer action, that consciousness determines technique rather than technique creating consciousness. From this perspective, all methods, all practices, all approaches are simply different doorways to the same essential state, the state of knowing beyond doubt, of certainty beyond question, of recognition beyond belief. This state cannot be manufactured through repetition of words, however powerful. It cannot be forced through intensity of emotion, however genuine. It cannot be faked through physical action, however convincing. It can only be allowed to emerge through surrender of all that blocks its natural expression, all doubt, all contradiction, all division within consciousness itself. Consider the difference between knowing how to swim intellectually and knowing in your body. One is information, the other is embodied certainty. One exists in mind, the other permeates every cell. One is subject to doubt, the other simply is beyond question, beyond verification, beyond proof. Silent knowing is this embodied certainty applied to your creative power. It is the difference between believing creation principles as concepts and recognizing them as the very nature of your being, between accepting manifestation as theory and experiencing it as your moment-to-moment reality. How then do we cultivate this quality of consciousness? Not through accumulating more information or mastering more techniques, but through dissolving the internal contradictions that prevent its natural emergence. Begin by bringing gentle awareness to the divided nature of your consciousness regarding one specific desire. Notice how part of you claims this desire as already fulfilled, while another part questions, doubts, seeks evidence. Notice how this division creates not just emotional conflict, but energetic confusion, a mixed signal that manifests as inconsistent results, as partial manifestations, as temporary appearances that dissolve back into potential. Now, instead of fighting this division, instead of trying to silence the doubtful mind through force of will, bring compassionate attention to both aspects of consciousness. Recognize that both exist not to create conflict, but to seek integration, not to block manifestation, but to evolve consciousness itself through the creative tension of their interaction. This recognition, this embrace of apparent opposites within your own awareness, creates space for a third possibility to emerge, the possibility of knowing that transcends both belief and doubt, that exists not in opposition to questioning, but in a dimension beyond the duality of certainty and uncertainty altogether. This third space, this silent knowing, contains both belief and doubt within its greater wholeness, just as the ocean contains both wave and still water within its unified nature. It does not eliminate the mind's natural movement between acceptance and questioning, but encompasses this movement within a larger field of unwavering awareness. From this unified field, creation flows not as struggle against doubt, but as natural expression of integrated consciousness. Manifestation occurs not through overcoming resistance, but through transcending the very concept of resistance itself. Tonight, as you rest in the gentle darkness that precedes sleep, I invite you to practice not the cultivation of silent knowing, for what is natural cannot be cultivated, but the recognition of its presence as your essential nature. Bring to mind one desire, one intention, one state you wish to experience. Now, instead of trying to convince yourself of its reality, instead of working to generate feelings of its fulfillment, simply notice what already knows within you. Beneath the mind's questions, beneath the heart's uncertainties, beneath the body's tensions, what silent part of your consciousness already recognizes this desire as fulfilled? This recognition, this gentle turning toward what already knows, activates manifestation power far beyond what effort can generate. For silent knowing does not create through force but through resonance, not through making but through revealing, not through becoming but through being. Feel the difference between the striving consciousness that says, I must make this happen, and the knowing consciousness that says, this is already accomplished. Feel how one creates tension while the other allows flow. Feel how one struggles against reality while the other aligns with deeper truth. As you attune to this silent knowing, you may notice subtle shifts in your physical body. Breathing deepens, muscles release, energy flows more freely. These physical changes are not incidental but integral to the manifestation process, for the body is the densest part of consciousness, the final frontier of transformation. When silent knowing permeates the cells themselves, physical reality has no choice but to reorganize around this new vibrational signature. Remember, silent knowing is not about convincing yourself of what is not yet true. It is about recognizing what has always been true beneath the surface appearance of things, that creation is finished, that all states exist now, that all possibilities are present within the infinite field of consciousness you call your own. Your creative act is not making something from nothing, but choosing from infinite something, not forcing manifestation but allowing expression, not creating new reality but shifting attention to the reality that resonates with your deepest knowing. And as attention shifts, as awareness stabilizes in the state of silent knowing, external circumstances rearrange themselves not through manipulation but through magnetic attraction, not through control but through resonance, not through doing but through being. This is the secret understood by the masters of every age, the principle embodied by the adepts of every tradition. Not that reality must be forced into new forms, but that consciousness, when aligned with its own deepest nature, naturally manifests the external conditions that match its internal state. Rest in this knowing as you drift towards sleep. Feel how it dissolves effort, eliminates strain, removes the anxious quality that often accompanies manifestation practice. Feel how it replaces these with effortless certainty, with quiet confidence, with peaceful assurance that what is yours cannot be kept from you, that what belongs in your experience must come to you, that what resonates with your true nature cannot fail to manifest in your reality. Silent knowing, the state where words fall away, where proof becomes unnecessary, where evidence is recognized not as cause of certainty, but as effect of consciousness already aligned with the reality of desire fulfilled. This is your natural state. This is your birthright. This is the quality of consciousness that transforms not through strain but through recognition of what has always been true, always been present, always been waiting for your awareness to turn toward it in gentle, powerful remembrance of your own divine nature. As our journey continues in the gentle darkness of this night, let us explore a state of consciousness so essential to manifestation, so fundamental to creation, that without it all techniques remain incomplete. All methods fall short of their potential. I speak of what Scripture calls the Sabbath state, that perfect rest that follows complete creation, that divine cessation of effort that allows manifestation to unfold according to its own perfect timing. The Sabbath, in its esoteric meaning, is not a day of the week but a quality of consciousness. It is not external observance but internal condition. It represents not the absence of activity but the presence of perfect trust. Trust so complete that striving ceases, effort disappears, and anxiety about results dissolves into peaceful certainty. To understand this state, we must first recognize the difference between creating and allowing creation to express. Most approach manifestation as continuous doing, constant visualization, persistent affirmation, repeated techniques designed to make something happen. They believe that if they pause this activity, if they cease this effort, creation itself will stop. The Sabbath state reveals a profound truth. Creation is already complete in consciousness. All possible states, all potential experiences, all desired manifestations already exist in finished form within the infinite field of pure awareness. Your task is not to make them real through constant effort, but to enter the state of consciousness where they are recognized as already real. This recognition, this shift from creating to allowing, from striving to receiving, is the essence of the Sabbath state. It is what Scripture refers to when it says, "And God rested on the seventh day from all his works," not because creation was incomplete or required further effort, but because it was finished, perfect, complete in the realm where all true creation begins. Consider how differently we would approach manifestation if we truly understood this principle. Instead of constantly doing in order to become, we would simply rest in the consciousness of being. Instead of working toward fulfillment, we would enter the state where fulfillment is already experienced as present reality. Instead of making things happen, we would allow them to express from the field of infinite potential that is our true nature. This allowing, this divine permission, is the secret power of the Sabbath state. It recognizes that manifestation flows not from personal effort, but from aligned consciousness, not from making but from being, not from future achievement but from present embodiment. How then do we enter this state of perfect rest, this consciousness of completed creation, not through more effort, not through better technique, not through increased activity, but through surrender of the very concept of process itself. Begin by recognizing where in your manifestation practice you still carry the energy of striving. Notice how it feels in your body, in your emotions, in your thoughts. Perhaps it appears as tension in the solar plexus, as anxiety about timing, as constant checking for evidence of progress. These sensations, these concerns, these checkpoints are not paths to manifestation but obstacles to the very state that allows manifestation to flow effortlessly. Now experiment with a radical shift in approach. Instead of asking, what more must I do to create this? Ask, how would I feel, think, and be if this creation were already complete? Instead of focusing on process, embody the state of finished manifestation. Instead of working toward rest in the consciousness of already accomplished. This shift from doing to being, from becoming to recognizing, from future to present, is the entrance to the Sabbath state. It dissolves the anxious energy of attainment, replacing it with the peaceful certainty of possession. It transforms manifestation from arduous journey to simple choice, from distant goal to present reality. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, that natural Sabbath that comes at the end of each day, I invite you to practice this consciousness of completion. Choose one desire, one intention, one state you wish to manifest. Now, instead of rehearsing the steps toward its fulfillment, enter fully into the feeling of its already accomplished reality. Feel how different this approach is from typical manifestation practice. Feel how it releases strain, eliminates worry, dissolves the subtle anxiety that often accompanies creation. Feel how your breathing changes, how your body relaxes, how your mind quiets when you shift from becoming to being, from pursuing to possessing, from future attainment to present embodiment. This state, this quality of consciousness, is what allows the invisible to become visible, the potential to become actual, the conceived to become perceived, not through your effort but through your alignment with the natural flow of creation itself. Remember, the world you experience is not separate from the consciousness that perceives it. It does not exist out there independent of your awareness. It is the exteriorization of your dominant state, the outpicturing of your prevailing assumption, the reflection of your consistent consciousness. When this consciousness embodies the Sabbath state, when it rests in the certainty of finished creation rather than striving for future attainment, physical reality has no choice but to rearrange itself to match this internal condition, not through supernatural intervention but through natural law, not as miracle but as principle. As you drift towards sleep, crossing the threshold from conscious effort to subconscious acceptance, maintain this feeling of accomplished creation. Let it be the final state you embody before surrendering to the night. For in sleep, the conscious mind's resistance dissolves, allowing the subconscious to accept fully what has been impressed upon it in the final moments of wakefulness. This practice, this deliberate entering of the Sabbath state before sleep, activates creative forces beyond the conscious mind's capacity to orchestrate. It engages the profound manifestation power of the subconscious, which knows no contradiction, accepts no impossibility, recognizes no limitation. The Sabbath state is not passive waiting. It is not resigned acceptance. It is active rest, conscious completion, deliberate embodiment of the consciousness that knows creation as finished fact rather than future possibility. In this state you do not abandon action in the world. You do not neglect the practical steps that wisdom suggests. You simply perform these actions from a different consciousness, not from the energy of making something happen, but from the certainty of expressing what already is, not from anxiety about results, but from peaceful trust in perfect unfoldment. This trust, this divine confidence, is what Scripture refers to when it speaks of faith, not blind belief but quiet knowing, not desperate hope but calm certainty, not future-focused anticipation but present-centered embodiment. Rest in this certainty as night embraces you. Feel how it transforms not just your approach to manifestation but your experience of life itself. Feel how it shifts your relationship with time, with effort, with becoming. Feel how it allows peace to replace struggle, acceptance to replace resistance, being to replace endless doing. The Sabbath state, the consciousness of completion that precedes physical manifestation, the divine rest that follows perfect creation, the sacred trust that allows invisible to become visible in its own perfect timing, its own perfect sequence, its own perfect expression. This is your true creative power, not the strain of personal will but the peaceful certainty of aligned consciousness, not the effort of making but the allowing of being, not the anxiety of becoming but the quiet confidence of already accomplished. Enter this state now, as sleep approaches. Let it be your companion through the night, your guide through dream, your foundation upon awakening. For when consciousness embodies the Sabbath, creation itself unfolds not as arduous process, but as natural expression of your own divine nature. In the sacred stillness of this moment, let us explore the most powerful creative declaration ever uttered, the most profound recognition ever expressed, the most transformative understanding ever embodied. These four simple words, revealed to Moses in the burning bush, contain the entire secret of manifestation, the complete principle of creation, the absolute foundation of all spiritual understanding. I am that I am. Not a phrase to be recited, but a truth to be recognized. Not a mantra to be repeated, but a state to be embodied. Not a technique to practice, but the very essence of your being to be acknowledged. To understand the creative power of I am is to understand the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. For I am is not merely a statement. It is the only reality, the sole substance, the singular power from which all experience emerges. Before any quality, any attribute, any state, any circumstance, there must first be the awareness that declares I am. This awareness, this pure consciousness, is not personal possession but universal presence. It is not something you have but what you are. Not an aspect of your being but the essence of all being. And yet in the unique configuration of consciousness you call self, this universal I am expresses in particular form, in specific qualities, in individual experience. This expression occurs through the creative power of I am when followed by any definition, any description, any state. I am wealthy. I am healthy. I am loved. I am successful. These are not affirmations about reality. They are declarations of identity that create reality. They are not descriptions of what exists outside you, but definitions of what constitutes the very essence of your being. Most use the creative power of I am unconsciously, unaware of how each inner declaration shapes experience, molds circumstance, creates the world they then perceive as separate from themselves. They say, I am tired. I am worried. I am confused, not recognizing these as creative statements rather than mere descriptions. Tonight I invite you to use this power consciously, deliberately, with full awareness of its creative force, not to manipulate external conditions but to align internal state with the reality you wish to experience, not to force manifestation but to embody the consciousness that naturally expresses as desired circumstance. Begin by recognizing that I am is not something you think but what you are. It is the awareness that perceives all thought, the consciousness that witnesses all emotion, the presence that experiences all sensation. It is what remains when all else, all identity, all definition, all limitation falls away. Rest in this pure awareness for a moment. Feel its spaciousness, its freedom, its unlimited nature. Feel how it exists prior to any thought, any feeling, any identity. This resting, this recognition of your essence beyond all description is the foundation of conscious creation. From this awareness, from this pure I am, you may now choose consciously what to declare as your being, what to define as your nature, what to embody as your reality, not as affirmation of what is not, but as recognition of what has always been true beneath the temporary identifications of ego consciousness. What state do you wish to embody? What reality do you wish to experience? What quality do you wish to express? Take this desire and place it after the sacred words I am, not as hope for future achievement, but as acknowledgement of present identity. Feel the difference between saying I want to be confident and declaring I am confident, between affirming I will be healthy and embodying I am healthy, between stating I am trying to be peaceful and recognizing I am peace itself. The first creates division within consciousness, a self that lacks, seeking a state it does not yet possess. The second establishes unity, a recognition of identity that allows natural expression. The first is manifestation through effort. The second is creation through being. This shift from becoming to being, from attaining to embodying, from seeking to recognizing, transforms manifestation from struggle to natural expression. It aligns you with the creative principle that has always operated, whether consciously employed or not. Consciousness precedes experience. Being precedes manifestation. I am precedes all form. Tonight, as you rest in that sacred space between waking and sleeping, I invite you to practice this conscious use of I am. Choose one quality, one state, one reality you wish to experience. Now, with full awareness of its creative power, declare silently within I am this now. Feel how this declaration resonates, not as hope but as recognition, not as future possibility but as present reality, not as something to achieve but as what you already are beneath all temporary appearances. If resistance arises, if part of you questions this identity, doubts this declaration, seeks evidence of its truth, do not fight against this response. Do not create further division by judging yourself for not immediately embodying the state with perfect conviction. Instead, embrace all aspects of consciousness with compassion, understanding that integration comes not through force but through loving recognition. Say to the doubtful mind, I understand your hesitation. I honor your desire for evidence, for verification, for tangible proof. Know that you are included in this new identity, this new state, this new embodiment. You are not eliminated but transformed, not rejected but embraced within a larger understanding. This inclusion, this embrace of all aspects of self within the new declaration of being, creates internal harmony that allows the I am statement to take root not just in conscious mind but in the deeper strata of consciousness where creation truly occurs. Remember, the power of I am lies not in repetition but in recognition, not in frequency but in depth, not in intensity but in the quiet certainty that comes when declaration aligns with innermost truth. What follows I am creates your reality, not through magical manifestation but through the natural expression of identity. When you declare I am wealthy, you begin to perceive through the consciousness of abundance, to recognize opportunities invisible to lack consciousness, to make decisions aligned with prosperity rather than scarcity. When you embody I am health, you naturally honor the body's wisdom, align with its healing mechanisms, choose activities that express vitality rather than deplete energy. This is not pretending. This is not self-deception. This is recognition of a larger truth, that the qualities you seek exist already within consciousness itself, within your consciousness, waiting not to be created but to be acknowledged, not to be achieved but to be expressed. I am that I am. The eternal truth spoken at the burning bush reveals not just divine nature but human essence. For the I am that is your core identity is the same I am that constitutes the universe itself, not separate presence but unified being, not distinct power but singular expression. As you drift towards sleep, let this understanding permeate not just mind but heart, not just emotion but the very cells of your body. Feel how it dissolves separation, eliminates struggle, removes the gap between current self and desired self that creates so much unnecessary suffering. There is no distance to travel, no gap to bridge, no transformation to force. There is only recognition of what has always been true, acknowledgement of what has always been present, embodiment of what has always constituted your essential nature. I am, the first cause, the creative principle, the foundation of all manifestation. Use this power consciously tonight and watch as your world transforms, not through effort but through alignment, not through doing but through being, not through becoming but through recognizing what you have always been beneath all temporary identifications, all passing states, all changing circumstances. I am that I am. I am the complete truth, the absolute reality, the eternal identity that was, is, and ever shall be the essence of your being and the substance of all creation. In the gentle darkness that surrounds us now, let us explore a practice so profound, so transformative, that when applied with understanding, it can literally reshape not just your future but your past. I speak of revision, the conscious reimagining of what has been, the deliberate rewriting of memory, the intentional recasting of experience to align with your highest vision of self and life. Most believe the past is fixed, immutable, beyond the reach of conscious creation. They say what's done is done, history cannot be changed, we must accept what has happened and move forward. And from the perspective of linear time, of physical events recorded in sequence, this appears to be true. But from the deeper understanding of consciousness as the only reality, we recognize something revolutionary. The past exists not as external fact but as internal memory, not as independent reality but as present impression within consciousness. And what exists in consciousness can be revised, reimagined, recreated through the same power that formed it initially. This understanding liberates you from the tyranny of what has been, from the limitations of personal history, from the conditioning of past experience. It reveals that you are not bound by memory but empowered to revise it, not restricted by history but free to rewrite it, not defined by what has happened but by how you choose to remember what has happened. Revision is not denial. It is not pretending painful events never occurred or difficult circumstances never existed. It is something far more subtle, far more powerful, a recognition that events themselves hold no inherent meaning, create no inevitable emotion, establish no permanent identity. The meaning, the emotion, the identity arising from experience comes not from what happened but from how consciousness interprets, frames, and stores what happened. Change the interpretation, revise the memory, and you literally change the past, not as recorded in collective history perhaps, but as impressed upon individual consciousness. And since your consciousness is the lens through which you perceive all reality, this internal revision transforms not just memory but present experience and future manifestation. How might we practice this transformative art in practical terms? Not through forced forgetting, not through denial of painful reality, not through suppression of authentic emotion, but through conscious reimagining of experience from the perspective of your larger self, your wiser understanding, your more compassionate heart. Tonight, as you rest in that space between waking and sleeping, that liminal realm where consciousness is most impressionable, I invite you to identify one memory, one experience, one event that continues to create limitation in your present life. Perhaps it's a moment of perceived failure, a painful rejection, a circumstance where you felt powerless or diminished. Bring this memory gently into awareness, not to relive its pain, not to reinforce its limitation, but to recognize it as present impression rather than fixed past, as current content of consciousness available for revision. Now, with the understanding that you view this memory not from then but from now, not from the limited perspective of past self but from the expanded awareness of present self, begin to reimagine how this experience might have unfolded in a way that affirms rather than diminishes your divine nature. Perhaps you see responding with greater confidence, expressing clearer boundaries, making wiser choices. Perhaps you recognize resources that were actually available but went unnoticed in the original experience. Perhaps you perceive the hidden gift, the veiled opportunity, the disguised blessing within what seemed only challenge. As you reimagine this experience, allow emotion to flow, not the recycled emotion of the original memory but the fresh feeling of the revised experience. Feel the relief, the empowerment, the peace that comes with seeing the same circumstance through new eyes, with greater understanding from expanded consciousness. This emotional shift is not incidental but essential to effective revision, for consciousness is altered not through intellectual reimagining alone, but through the feeling associated with new perception. The subconscious, that deeper stratum of mind where all memory is stored and from which all manifestation proceeds, responds not to concept but to conviction, not to idea but to impression, not to thought but to feeling-infused imagination. Having revised the memory in consciousness, having reimagined the experience with new understanding, having felt the emotion of this reimagined event, now release it completely, surrendering both original impression and revised vision to the deeper mind that knows how to reorganize consciousness in harmony with your new assumption. This releasing, this surrender of both old and new, prevents the tension that comes from trying too hard, from forcing revision through mental effort alone. It acknowledges that transformation occurs not through personal will but through alignment with the creative principle itself, which knows how to adjust all aspects of consciousness once the seed of new assumption has been planted. Some question whether revision actually changes what happened or merely alters our emotional response to what happened. But this question itself reveals misunderstanding of the nature of reality, for what is what happened except a present memory? And what is memory except a current configuration of consciousness? And what is consciousness except the very substance from which all experience is formed? Change consciousness, and you change not just future experience but the very meaning, impact and reality of past experience, not as pretense but as genuine transformation of how the past exists within your present awareness. This understanding reveals revision not as psychological technique but as spiritual principle, a recognition that consciousness is cause of all experience, whether that experience is labeled past, present or future. Revise the causal state and you transform the entire spectrum of experience flowing from it. As you practice revision tonight, reimagining one specific memory with new awareness, notice how different your body feels in this revised state. Notice how tension releases, how breathing deepens, how energy flows more freely. These physical shifts are not merely relaxation responses but indications of actual transformation occurring at the cellular level, where memory is stored not just in mind but in the very tissues of the body itself. This bodily healing, this physical release extends the power of revision beyond mental concept into embodied reality. It transforms revision from intellectual exercise into whole being experience, from imagined change into cellular reality. The practice of revision, applied consistently over time, creates a profound shift in identity itself, for what is identity but the accumulated impression of experience? Change the impression and you change the self that emerges from it, not through becoming someone new but through recognizing who you have always been beneath the distorting lens of limited memory, beneath the restrictive narrative of personal history. This is not self-deception. This is not fantasy. This is recognition of a larger truth, that your eternal self exists beyond all temporal experience, all personal history, all accumulated memory. Revision simply aligns your remembered self with this eternal identity, bringing the temporal into harmony with the eternal, the personal into resonance with the divine. As you drift towards sleep tonight, having practiced the gentle art of revision with one specific memory, allow the principle to extend naturally to your entire history, not through forced reimagining of every experience but through recognition that all memory exists in consciousness now, all history lives as present impression, all past breathes in the eternal moment we call now. And in this now you are free, free to remember differently, free to interpret newly, free to assign meaning that empowers rather than limits, that expands rather than constricts, that liberates rather than binds. This freedom, this sovereign right to revise consciousness itself is your divine inheritance. Use it wisely, use it lovingly, use it in service to the revelation of your true nature, which has never been defined by circumstance, never been limited by history, never been bound by the temporary identifications that arise from unrevised memory. For when memory aligns with divine identity, when personal history harmonizes with eternal nature, when temporal experience reflects timeless truth, manifestation flows not from effort but from essence, not from striving but from being, not from becoming but from recognizing what has always been your truest, deepest, most authentic self. As our journey continues in this quiet hour, let us explore one of the most counterintuitive yet powerful principles of conscious creation, the sublime art of letting go. In a world that celebrates control, that equates manifestation with effort, that links creation to doing rather than being, this principle challenges our deepest assumptions about how reality forms around our intentions. The art of letting go is not abandonment of desire. It is not resignation to circumstance. It is not passive acceptance of whatever appears. It is something far more nuanced, far more powerful, a profound surrender not of what we seek to create, but of how we believe creation must occur. Most approach manifestation as an elaborate game of control, visualizing with perfect detail, affirming with precise wording, acting with calculated strategy, all designed to make something happen through personal will. They believe that the more they control the process, the more certain the outcome. Yet paradoxically, this very control often becomes the greatest obstacle to manifestation. For embedded within control is subtle but profound contradiction, a vibrational confusion that blocks rather than facilitates the natural flow of creation. Consider what control implies: that something is absent and must be acquired, that something is wrong and must be fixed, that something is threatened and must be protected. These implications generate energetic signature of lack, of struggle, of resistance, precisely the opposite of the state that allows manifestation to flow effortlessly. Letting go dissolves this contradiction. It releases the anxious energy of making, replacing it with the allowing energy of being. It transforms manifestation from personal achievement to natural expression, from effortful process to graceful unfoldment. But what exactly are we letting go of? Not the clarity of intention, not the feeling of desire fulfilled, not the consciousness of the wish completed. We release not these essential elements of creation, but the attachment to particular paths, specific timelines, exact forms through which manifestation must appear. We surrender not what but how, not destination but route, not vision but method. And in this surrender, this profound trust in wisdom beyond personal perspective, we activate creative forces far more elegant, far more powerful than conscious mind could ever orchestrate. How do we practice this subtle art in practical terms? Not through forced detachment, not through pretended indifference, not through suppression of genuine concern, but through recognition of a larger truth, that what belongs in your experience cannot be kept from your experience, that what resonates with your true nature must express in your reality, that what aligns with your authentic self will manifest in perfect timing. This recognition, this absolute trust in the perfect unfolding of creation itself, allows genuine letting go, not as technique but as natural response to deeper understanding. Tonight, as you rest in the gentle darkness, I invite you to identify one desire, one intention, one vision that has created tension through excessive control. Perhaps it's a relationship outcome you've tried to force, a material manifestation you've struggled to create, a circumstance you've attempted to manipulate into being. Bring awareness to how this control feels in your body. Notice the contraction, the subtle anxiety, the energetic signature of trying rather than allowing, of making rather than being. This awareness itself begins the process of release, of surrender, of letting go. Now, with gentleness rather than force, allow yourself to consider a radical possibility. What if the intelligence that creates worlds, that maintains galaxies, that orchestrates the perfect unfolding of all life, is fully capable of bringing your desire to fruition without your anxious oversight? What if the same wisdom that knows how to beat your heart, grow your cells, maintain the precise balance of countless bodily systems without your conscious control, also knows the perfect path to manifest your conscious intention? Feel how this consideration shifts something in your body. Feel how it transforms energy from contracted to expanded, from tense to flowing, from resistant to receptive. This shift is not just emotional release but vibrational transformation, an energetic change that allows manifestation to proceed unobstructed by the very consciousness seeking to create it. Now, having recognized the wisdom beyond personal perspective, consciously release your desire, not in abandonment but in trust, not in resignation but in confidence, not in detachment but in profound connection to the creative principle itself. Imagine your desire as a bird you've nurtured, strengthened, prepared for flight. Feel the moment of release as you open your hands, allowing this bird to soar not away from you but toward the perfect fulfillment of its nature. Feel the joy in this releasing, the freedom in this surrender, the power in this trust. This letting go is not one-time event but ongoing practice, a constant choice to release control while maintaining clarity, to surrender method while preserving vision, to trust process while honoring intention. For control is not power but limitation, not strength but restriction, not path to manifestation but obstacle to its natural flow. True power lies in alignment with the creative principle itself, the principle that manifests not through force but through resonance, not through effort but through harmony, not through making but through being. As you drift towards sleep, practice this art of letting go with one specific desire. Feel how it transforms not just your approach to manifestation but your experience of life itself. Feel how it shifts your relationship with uncertainty, with timing, with process. Feel how it allows peace to replace anxiety, trust to replace control, flow to replace force. For when we truly let go, when we surrender not vision but attachment to how vision must materialize, we enter a state that allows rather than obstructs, that invites rather than demands, that receives rather than grasps. And in this state, manifestation transforms from arduous journey to graceful dance, from difficult achievement to natural expression. The art of letting go. The paradoxical truth that to have we must release, to receive we must surrender, to create we must allow, not as contradiction but as perfect principle, not as spiritual platitude but as practical path to manifestation beyond struggle, beyond effort, beyond the limitations of personal will. Rest in this letting go as sleep embraces you. Rest as ocean rests in its depths undisturbed by the waves that play upon its surface. Rest as sky rests unchanged by the clouds that pass through its vastness. For you are that ocean, that sky, the immutable awareness beneath all temporary experience, the unchanging presence within all passing forms. And from this rest, this profound peace, this perfect trust, creation flows not as something you achieve but as what you naturally express. The effortless radiation of your own divine nature, unobstructed by anxiety, unrestrained by control, unlimited by the desperate energy of trying to make something happen that is already accomplished in the realm where all true creation begins. In the quietude of this moment, let us explore a principle so fundamental to conscious creation, so essential to manifestation, that without its understanding all techniques remain surface movements, all practices temporary adjustments. I speak of the relationship between the observer and the observed, between the consciousness that perceives and the reality it experiences. Most live their entire lives never questioning the apparent separation between self and world, between internal awareness and external circumstance, between the me in here and the reality out there. They believe themselves distinct entities navigating an independent universe, sometimes aligned with its flow, sometimes opposed to its movement, but always separate from its essential nature. Yet the deepest spiritual traditions, the most profound mystical insights, and now even the cutting edge of quantum physics suggest something radically different, that observer and observed are not separate realities but inseparable aspects of a unified field of consciousness, that what you perceive as out there exists not independent of the awareness perceiving it, but as extension of that very awareness, as expression of its nature, as reflection of its state. This understanding transforms manifestation from manipulation of external forces to recognition of internal truth. It reveals that what appears as circumstance, as condition, as environment, is not cause of your experience, but effect of your consciousness, not what determines your state but what expresses it, not what happens to you but what flows from you. The implications of this understanding are revolutionary. If the observed reality is inseparable from the observing consciousness, then transformation of consciousness must precede transformation of experience. Change of perception must lead change of circumstance. Shift of awareness must initiate shift of reality. Most reverse this sequence. They say, when my circumstances improve, then my consciousness will elevate. When my conditions change, then my perception will transform. And in this reversal, they surrender their creative power, abandoning sovereignty over experience to the very conditions their consciousness has created. The observer-observed principle restores this sovereignty. It recognizes that consciousness is not effect but cause, not result but source, not dependent variable but independent creator of all experience. How might we apply this profound understanding in practical terms? Not through trying to force external change through mental effort, not through manipulating circumstances through personal will, but through genuinely shifting the observing consciousness itself, through transforming the perceiver rather than attempting to rearrange the perceived. Tonight, as you rest in this space between your days, I invite you to experiment with this principle. Bring to awareness one circumstance, one condition, one aspect of current reality that you wish to transform. It might be physical state, relationship dynamic, financial situation. Whatever the sphere, bring it clearly into focus. Now, instead of immediately seeking to change this circumstance, become curious about the consciousness that perceives it, about the observer who notices, interprets, experiences this particular aspect of reality. Notice the judgments, the emotional responses, the habitual perceptions that arise in relation to this condition. These responses, these automatic reactions, reveal the state of the observing consciousness. They show not just what you see, but how you see, not just what you experience, but from what level of awareness you experience. This recognition, this gentle turning of attention from the observed to the observer, is itself transformative. For what was unconscious becomes conscious. What was automatic becomes choice. What was habitual becomes opportunity for new perception. From this awareness, from this conscious recognition of how you have been observing, you are free to choose again, to shift not the circumstance itself, but the consciousness that perceives circumstance. Not to change what is observed, but to transform the observer. What would love see in this? What would wisdom perceive? What would the divine perspective, the view from consciousness untainted by fear, by limitation, by separation, recognize in this very circumstance that now appears problematic? Allow this shift of perception to occur, not through force but through genuine opening to larger truth. Feel how it changes not just mental concept but emotional response, not just intellectual understanding, but energetic relationship with the circumstance itself. And as perception shifts, as the observer transforms, notice how the observed begins to change, not through manipulation but through resonance, not through control but through alignment, not through doing but through being. This change of the observed reality following shift in the observer is not magical manifestation, but natural extension of the unified field of consciousness, expressing itself through both perceiver and perceived. It is not supernatural intervention, but normal operation of the creative principle that has always governed experience, whether recognized or not. As you practice this principle tonight with one specific circumstance, you may notice resistance arise, the habitual mind questioning whether simple shift in perception can actually change external reality. This doubt is natural, conditioned by lifetime of believing in the primacy of physical, in the separation of observer and observed, in the independence of circumstance from consciousness. When this doubt appears, remember that you are not trying to convince yourself of something untrue. You are simply recognizing a deeper truth that has always operated beneath surface appearance, the truth that consciousness precedes form, that observer creates observed, that inner state manifests as outer reality. This recognition allows genuine transformation of the observing consciousness, not through effort but through alignment with what has always been true, beneath the illusion of separation, beneath the appearance of division, beneath the temporary experience of observer, distinct from observer. Feel how this alignment shifts something fundamental in your relationship with reality itself. Feel how it dissolves the boundary between inner and outer, between self and world, between what you are and what you experience. Feel how it restores the natural unity that existed before perception divided consciousness into subject and object, into perceiver and perceived. This unity, this recognition of observer and observed as expressions of single consciousness, is the foundation of effortless manifestation. For when division dissolves, when separation falls away, when the illusory boundary between awareness and experience disappears, creation becomes not achievement but revelation, not acquisition but recognition, not becoming but being. As you drift towards sleep, practice this unity consciousness with one specific circumstance. Feel how it transforms not just your perception of this condition, but your relationship with reality itself. Feel how it shifts your approach to manifestation from trying to change what is out there, to recognizing what is in here, from manipulating effects to transforming cause, from rearranging the observed to shifting the observer. For when observer transforms, observed must follow, not through force but through natural expression, not as miracle, but as principle, not as exception but as law, that has always governed the relationship between consciousness and form, between awareness and experience, between the perceiver and the perceived world that is, in essence, inseparable extension of that very perception. This is the profound simplicity at the heart of all manifestation. Change how you observe, and you change what is observed. Transform consciousness, and you transform experience. Shift the inner and the outer must follow, not through effort but through the perfect reflection that has always existed between what you are and what you perceive as separate from yourself. As the night deepens around us, let us explore the most transformative, most essential, most powerful aspect of conscious creation, the element without which all techniques remain hollow, all methods superficial, all practices merely intellectual exercises. I speak of spiritual sensation, the felt reality that bridges the gap between concept and experience, between intellectual understanding and embodied knowing, between thinking about states and actually occupying them. Most approach manifestation primarily through mental activity, through visualization, through affirmation, through intellectual understanding of spiritual principles. They believe that if they can see it clearly enough in mind, declare it convincingly enough in words, understand it thoroughly enough in concept, manifestation must follow. Yet something crucial remains missing from this approach, something so fundamental that without it, creation itself remains incomplete. This missing element is feeling, not emotion in the ordinary sense, not the reactive feelings that come and go with circumstance, but spiritual sensation, the deep embodied knowing of a state as present reality rather than future possibility. Neville Goddard expressed this principle with perfect clarity. It is not what you think or say that brings your desires to pass, but rather what you feel. For feeling is the secret of creation, the bridge between imagination and manifestation, between conception and birth, between potential and actual. Why is feeling so essential to manifestation? Because consciousness does not create from thought alone, but from the whole spectrum of being, from the integrated field that includes not just mental conception but bodily sensation, not just intellectual understanding but visceral knowing, not just visual imagination but complete sensory experience. The universe responds not to concept but to state, to the total vibrational signature you emit through every aspect of consciousness. And this signature is determined not by what you think about a reality, but by how fully you feel yourself to be living within that reality now. Think of something you now possess that you once desired, perhaps a relationship, a home, a position. Before it manifested physically, there came a moment when you felt it as real, when you experienced it as present, when you knew it with certainty beyond evidence. This feeling knowing preceded physical manifestation, not coincidentally but causally. It was the bridge across which potential traveled to become actual. Tonight, as you rest in the space between your days, I invite you to explore the transformative power of spiritual sensation. Choose one desire, one intention, one reality you wish to experience. Now, instead of merely thinking about this reality, instead of only visualizing its details, allow yourself to feel it as present fact, to experience it with your entire being as current rather than future. This feeling transcends ordinary emotion. It is not the excited anticipation of what might be, but the settled recognition of what is. Not the emotional high of imagined attainment, but the quiet certainty of present possession. Not the desperate wanting of something absent, but the peaceful enjoyment of something already yours. How do we access this spiritual sensation? Not through trying to manufacture feeling, not through emotionally intensifying visualization, not through forcing sensation that doesn't arise naturally, but through genuine shift from thinking of a state to occupying a state, from mentally conceiving reality to experientially entering it. Begin with simple recognition. The state you desire to experience already exists within the field of consciousness. It is not something to be created, but something to be selected. Not something to be achieved, but something to be embodied. Not something to be attained, but something to be assumed. From this recognition, gently shift attention from thinking about the state to feeling from the state, to experiencing world as you would if this reality were already physically present. Notice how your body would feel, how your energy would flow, how your perception would operate if what you desire were not future possibility but present fact. This shift from conceptual to experiential, from intellectual to embodied, from thinking to feeling, activates creative forces beyond mental capacity to orchestrate. It engages the totality of consciousness in the manifestation process, aligning all aspects of being with the vibrational signature of desire fulfilled. As you practice this feeling into states, you may notice resistance arise, the habitual mind questioning whether what is not yet visible can be felt as real, whether what is not yet tangible can be experienced as present. This doubt is natural, conditioned by lifetime of believing evidence must precede knowing, confirmation must precede certainty, external must validate internal. When this resistance appears, remember that you are not trying to convince yourself of something untrue. You are not engaging in self-deception or emotional manipulation. You are simply recognizing the true order of creation, that feeling precedes manifestation, that sensation precedes circumstance, that internal state precedes external condition. This recognition allows genuine spiritual sensation to arise, not as forced emotion but as natural response to deeper truth, not as manufactured feeling, but as authentic experience of reality beyond temporary appearance, beyond limited perception, beyond the illusion of separation between what is desired and what is possessed. Feel how this spiritual sensation permeates not just mind but body, how it relaxes muscles, shifts breathing, changes posture, alters facial expression. These physical responses are not incidental, but integral to the manifestation process. For the body is the densest aspect of consciousness, the final frontier of transformation, the place where energetic patterns become most visible, most tangible, most fully expressed. When spiritual sensation infuses physical form, when the body itself begins to resonate with the vibrational signature of desire fulfilled, manifestation becomes not distant hope, but imminent expression, not future possibility, but present reality in process of revealing itself through perfect sequence, perfect timing, perfect unfoldment. As you drift towards sleep tonight, crossing that threshold where conscious mind surrenders to deeper aspects of awareness, maintain this spiritual sensation of desire fulfilled. Let it be the final state you embody before sleep embraces you. For in sleep, the conscious mind's resistance dissolves, allowing subconscious to accept fully what has been impressed upon it through the language it understands most perfectly, the language of feeling, of sensation, of embodied knowing. This practice, this deliberate feeling of the wish fulfilled as prelude to sleep, activates manifestation power far beyond daytime technique. It engages the deepest strata of consciousness, impressing upon the subconscious mind not concept but experience, not idea but reality, not possibility but present fact. And the subconscious, that faithful servant that accepts without question what consciousness offers as true, begins immediately to reorganize perception, to attract circumstance, to arrange condition in harmony with this impressed pattern, not through supernatural intervention, but through natural law, not as miracle but as principle, not as exception but as perfect expression of how creation has always operated, whether recognized or not. Spiritual sensation, the felt reality that bridges invisible and visible, potential and actual, conceived and perceived, not enhancement to manifestation but its very essence, not addition to creation but its fundamental substance, not technique to be practiced but state to be embodied as the primary creative act itself. For when feeling aligns with vision, when sensation harmonizes with intention, when embodied knowing supports conscious desire, manifestation flows not as arduous process, but as natural expression, the effortless unfoldment of what has already been accomplished in the realm where all true creation begins. As our journey continues in this sacred hour, let us turn our attention to an aspect of consciousness often overlooked in manifestation teaching, yet crucial to genuine transformation. I speak of the shadow self, those aspects of your being that exist beneath conscious awareness, that operate outside deliberate choice, that influence creation in ways both subtle and profound. The shadow contains all you have disowned, all you have rejected, all you have deemed unacceptable within your own nature. It holds the qualities, the impulses, the aspects of self that contradicted your image of who you should be, who you were told to be, who you believed yourself to be. In the context of conscious creation, this shadow self becomes not peripheral concern but central consideration. For manifestation flows not from partial self but from whole self, not from the fragment of consciousness you identify with, but from the totality of your being, including what remains hidden, what operates in darkness, what exists below the threshold of awareness. Most approach manifestation as though consciousness were a uniform field without contradiction, without division, without opposing currents. They affirm abundance while unconsciously believing in scarcity. They declare health while secretly expecting illness. They proclaim love while inwardly fearing rejection. And in this division, this contradiction, this inner opposition, creation itself becomes confused, manifesting not clarity but chaos, not coherence but conflict, not the desired state, but the mixed vibration of conscious intention undermined by unconscious resistance. The shadow self is not enemy of manifestation, but unacknowledged partner in the creative process. When recognized, when integrated, when brought from darkness into light, it transforms from obstacle to ally, from resistance to resource, from opposing force to creative collaborator. How then do we approach this shadow self, this hidden aspect of our own consciousness? Not through judgment that deepens division, not through force that strengthens resistance, not through rejection that intensifies separation, but through compassionate awareness, through loving recognition, through genuine acceptance of all that exists within the field of our own being. Tonight, as you rest in the gentle darkness that mirrors the inner territory we explore, I invite you to bring awareness to one desire, one intention, one state you wish to manifest, but that has remained elusive despite conscious focus. Perhaps it's prosperity that never quite stabilizes, relationship that repeats familiar patterns, health that improves then regresses. Now, with curiosity rather than judgment, with exploration rather than expectation, inquire what aspect of my own consciousness might oppose this creation. What part of me might resist this manifestation? What element of self might fear the very outcome I consciously desire? Let the answers arise naturally, without force, without demand, without predetermined conclusion. They may come as words, as images, as bodily sensations, as memories long forgotten. Whatever form they take, welcome them as messengers, bearing important information about the divided nature of your own creative consciousness. Perhaps you'll discover that abundance feels threatening, because part of you associates it with responsibility you don't feel ready to shoulder. Perhaps health seems somehow unsafe, because illness has become familiar identity. Perhaps love appears risky because past vulnerability led to pain. These discoveries are not failures of manifestation. They are not evidence of spiritual lack. They are not proof of flawed technique. They are simply force without presumption, without predetermined conclusion. They may come as gentle insight, as subtle knowing, as quiet revelation about aspects of creation process invisible to conscious mind but essential to complete manifestation. Perhaps you'll recognize that the relationship you desire requires further internal integration before external harmony can reflect this wholeness. Perhaps health restoration involves cellular regeneration unfolding through natural cycles beyond conscious control. Perhaps abundance increase necessitates dissolution of limiting patterns before new financial forms can emerge sustainably. These recognitions are not justifications for delay but revelations of perfect process, not excuses for manifestation failure, but insights into manifestation wisdom unfolding through its own divine timing, its own perfect sequence, its own immaculate orchestration. From this understanding, this expanded perspective on the nature of creation itself, faith transforms from desperate holding to quiet knowing, from clinging despite evidence to recognizing evidence itself as perfect phase in complete process rather than contradiction to process itself. This knowing allows genuine peace with divine timing, not as resignation to delay but as alignment with wisdom that understands what consciousness must undergo before desire can manifest in form that truly satisfies, that genuinely fulfills, that completely expresses the essence of intention rather than merely its surface appearance. As you practice this alignment with divine timing, certain attitudes sustain faith not as effort but as natural expression of deeper understanding. First among these is gentle release of attachment to when and how manifestation must occur, not in abandonment of desire itself, but in surrender of limited perspective on how desire must be fulfilled. This releasing, this divine indifference to particular form, specific timeline, exact manner of manifestation, creates space for wisdom beyond personal viewpoint to orchestrate circumstances in ways far more elegant, far more perfect than conscious mind could arrange through its own limited vision, its own restricted understanding, its own partial perspective. Second is compassionate allowing of frustration, of impatience, of the very human response to apparent delay without judgment, without resistance, without the secondary suffering that comes from believing these reactions should not exist in spiritually mature creator. These natural human responses to gap between inner state and outer circumstance are not failures but opportunities, invitations to practice the art of feeling completion despite temporary appearance of incompletion, of knowing fulfillment despite momentary experience of unfulfillment. When impatience arises, acknowledge its presence without identifying with its energy. I notice impatience appearing in consciousness. When frustration emerges, recognize its existence without becoming its expression. I observe frustration moving through awareness. This witnessing, this compassionate allowing without embodiment, maintains the vibrational integrity of the state you've assumed while honoring the human experience of passage through linear time where gap between conception and birth feels real, significant, worthy of emotional response. Third is deliberate cultivation of gratitude for the perfect unfoldment already in process, not as technique to manipulate result but as genuine recognition that what appears as absence is actually fullness yet unseen, what seems as lack is actually abundance in formation, what feels as delay is actually perfect timing ensuring complete rather than partial manifestation of heart's true desire. This gratitude, this appreciation for what is unseen yet active, unfelt yet forming, unknown yet arranging itself in perfect pattern, aligns consciousness with the truth beneath appearance, with the reality beyond perception, with the completion already accomplished in the realm where all true creation begins. As you drift towards sleep tonight, hold gently any manifestation that appears delayed. Instead of reinforcing frustration through attention to its energy, instead of amplifying impatience through focus on its vibration, rest in the peaceful certainty that what belongs to you cannot be kept from you, that what resonates with your true nature must express in your experience, that what aligns with your authentic self will manifest in perfect timing, divine rather than personal, wisdom guided rather than ego determined, harmony ensuring rather than merely desire fulfilling. This resting, this peaceful abiding in the gap between inner acceptance and outer appearance, allows wisdom beyond rational mind to complete its perfect work without the interference that comes from anxiety, without the obstruction that comes from trying to force particular timeline, without the resistance that comes from consciousness arguing with its own creation process. For when dreams seem delayed, the invitation is not to abandon faith but to deepen it, not to question principle but to expand understanding of how principle operates through divine wisdom rather than personal will, through perfect sequence rather than demanded timeline, through harmony with all aspects of consciousness, rather than merely conscious intention divorced from greater wholeness. This is the faith that transforms waiting from passive endurance to active peace, from frustrated marking of time to conscious participation in divine unfoldment, from anxious concern about manifestation failure to quiet certainty of manifestation completing itself through wisdom far more comprehensive, far more loving, far more perfect than personal perspective could ever demand, orchestrate or even imagine possible. In this sacred hour, as silence deepens around us, let us explore what many consider the most challenging aspect of conscious creation, the most profound test of manifestation understanding. I speak of those moments when external circumstances not merely fail to confirm your assumption, but actively appear to contradict it, when evidence seems to deny rather than support your creation, when experience appears to refute rather than validate your faith, when reality itself seems to stand in opposition to the very state you faithfully assumed. These moments, these apparent contradictions between inner knowing and outer appearance, represent not failure of manifestation principle but its most rigorous testing, not evidence that creation doesn't work, but invitation to discover the depth of your understanding, the quality of your faith, the unwavering nature of your assumption. For in these moments of apparent opposition, consciousness reveals its true relationship with circumstance. Does it derive its certainty from external evidence, basing faith on visible confirmation, or does it maintain conviction from internal knowing, recognizing external as effect rather than cause, as reflection rather than source, as expression rather than authority? Most approach manifestation with unconscious hierarchy that places physical above metaphysical, visible above invisible, circumstance above consciousness. They believe, though they might not admit it even to themselves, that external reality holds final authority, that if circumstances persistently contradict assumption, circumstance must be right and assumption must be wrong. This hierarchy itself becomes obstacle to creation, not because it violates spiritual law, but because it reverses the very order through which manifestation occurs. It places effect before cause, reflection before original, shadow before substance. And in this reversal, conscious creation becomes impossible. For how can cause follow effect, original follow reflection, substance follow shadow? The testing of faith reveals whether this reversal operates in your consciousness, whether external evidence still holds authority over internal knowing, whether physical circumstance still determines rather than expresses your state, whether the visible world still dictates rather than reflects the truth you've assumed in consciousness. How then do we respond when circumstances seem to contradict our assumption? Not through denial of current appearance, not through rejection of present experience, not through suppression of natural human response to challenging conditions, but through deeper recognition of the true relationship between consciousness and circumstance, through genuine understanding that what appears as external opposition is actually call to internal alignment, invitation to greater congruence, opportunity for more complete embodiment of the state declared as true despite temporary evidence to the contrary. Tonight, as you rest in the gentle darkness, I invite you to bring awareness to one area where circumstances seem to oppose your assumption, where external conditions appear to contradict your faith, where visible evidence seems to deny rather than confirm your conscious creation. Perhaps it's financial situation worsening, despite assumption of abundance, physical condition declining despite embodiment of health, relationship deteriorating, despite state of harmony assumed as true. Now, with compassionate clarity rather than harsh judgment, with gentle honesty rather than brutal criticism, inquire, how am I responding internally to this apparent contradiction? Am I allowing external to determine internal circumstance to define state, appearance to overrule assumption? Or am I maintaining unwavering knowledge that consciousness precedes circumstance, that inner determines outer, that assumption must manifest regardless of temporary appearance to the contrary? Let awareness reveal the truth without defensiveness, without justification, without the ego's need to appear spiritually advanced rather than humanly vulnerable. For it is in this vulnerable honesty, this transparent self-reflection, this genuine recognition of where faith truly stands in relationship to circumstance, that the opportunity for transformation emerges. If you discover that external evidence still holds authority in your consciousness, still determines your state, still defines your identity, still dictates your faith, recognize this not as failure, but as illumination, not as spiritual deficiency, but as human reality, not as reason for self-criticism, but as invitation to gentle correction through deeper understanding. This understanding begins with recognition of a profound truth. The circumstances that appear to contradict your assumption exist not separate from consciousness, but as expression of consciousness itself, not of the new state consciously assumed perhaps, but of division within consciousness, where part aligns with new state, while another part maintains allegiance to previous state, where fragment declares abundance, while another fragment expects lack, where aspect embodies health, while another aspect anticipates illness. These divisions, these contradictions within consciousness itself, must express as contradictory circumstances, as physical conditions that reflect the very division existing within the awareness that creates all conditions, not as punishment but as perfect reflection, not as opposition but as demonstration of the absolute law that consciousness creates circumstance in its own divided or unified image. From this recognition, this understanding of circumstance as mirror rather than authority, genuine transformation becomes possible, not through fighting against condition, but through unifying consciousness, not through denying appearance, but through resolving inner contradiction, not through rejecting reality, but through recognizing reality itself as faithful reflection of your own creative awareness. How do we create this unification, this resolution, this recognition in practical terms? Not through force, but through compassion, through gentle acknowledgement of all aspects of consciousness without rejection, without judgment, without the very division such exclusion would perpetuate. Begin by bringing loving awareness to the part of consciousness still aligned with previous state, still identified with old reality, still expecting manifestation contrary to conscious intention. Recognize this aspect not as enemy, but as aspect of self operating from different understanding, different experience, different level of knowing than the conscious mind that has embraced new assumption. Speak to this aspect with the tenderness you would offer beloved child, with the patience you would extend cherished friend, with the compassion you would give any being suffering, not from malice but from misunderstanding. I see you, I honor your concern, I recognize your protective intention. You are not rejected but included, not eliminated but transformed, not left behind but brought along on this journey of consciousness expanding into greater recognition of its own creative power. This inclusion, this loving embrace of all aspects of self within the new assumption, dissolves the very division that manifests as contradictory circumstance. It creates unified field where intention flows without opposition, where desire moves without resistance, where creation proceeds from wholeness rather than fragmentation, and as consciousness unifies, circumstances must transform, not through manipulation but through natural reflection, not through force but through faithful expression, not through miracle, but through the perfect operation of law that manifests the state of consciousness as corresponding condition in the visible world. As you practice this unification, certain qualities sustain faith, not as desperate holding but as natural expression of deeper understanding. First among these is peaceful persistence in the assumed state, regardless of contradictory evidence, not through denial of appearance, but through recognition of appearance as passing phase rather than permanent reality, as reflection of consciousness in transition, rather than final statement of what must be. This persistence is not stubborn rejection of reality, but conscious choice of which reality to energize with attention, the temporary appearance of the senses, or the eternal truth of consciousness as first cause, as creative principle, as the singular power that reshapes all circumstance through unwavering assumption maintained despite temporary contradiction. Second is compassionate allowing of doubt, of fear, of the very human response to challenging circumstances without judgment, without resistance, without the secondary suffering that comes from believing these reactions should not exist in spiritually awakened creator. These natural responses to apparent opposition between inner state and outer condition are not failures but opportunities, invitations to practice the art of maintaining faith, not in absence of doubt, but in the presence of doubt embraced with love rather than rejected with fear. When doubt arises, acknowledge its presence without identifying with its conclusion. I notice doubt appearing in consciousness. When fear emerges, recognize its existence without becoming its expression. I observe fear moving through awareness. This witnessing, this compassionate allowing without embodiment, maintains the vibrational integrity of the assumed state, while honoring the human experience of navigating a world that appears, temporarily, to contradict that state. Third, is deliberate cultivation of gratitude for the perfect unfoldment already in process, not as spiritual bypass of genuine feeling, but as authentic recognition that what appears as contradiction is actually confirmation of consciousness in transition. What seems as opposition is actually opportunity for deeper embodiment. What feels as testing is actually invitation to more complete understanding of the absolute law that consciousness creates reality in its own image, whether divided or unified, whether conflicted or integrated. This gratitude, this appreciation for even the challenging phases of the manifestation journey, aligns consciousness with the truth beneath appearance, with the reality beyond perception, with the completion already accomplished in the realm where all true creation begins. As you drift towards sleep tonight, hold gently any circumstance that appears to contradict your faith. Instead of fighting against this appearance, instead of rejecting this phase of the journey, instead of denying this aspect of the creation process, rest in the peaceful certainty that contradiction itself serves purpose, revealing where consciousness remains divided, illuminating where faith requires deepening, clarifying where assumption needs strengthening, not through force but through more complete understanding, more authentic embodiment, more genuine recognition of the absolute creative power that has always been yours to direct, to focus, to express through the quality of your own unwavering conviction. For the testing of faith is not punishment, but purification, not obstacle but opportunity, not evidence of failure, but invitation to discover the unwavering nature of genuine assumption, the kind that stands firm not in absence of contradiction, but in the very presence of apparent opposition, maintaining peaceful certainty, not because circumstance confirms, but because consciousness knows itself as cause, rather than effect, as creator rather than creation, as the singular power, from which all circumstance emerges as perfect reflection, as faithful expression, as inevitable manifestation of the state, assumed as true regardless of temporary appearance to the contrary. In the depths of this night, as silence embraces us in its gentle arms, let us explore a profound transformation that occurs not just once in a lifetime, but potentially in every moment of conscious creation. I speak of what Scripture calls the second birth, that mysterious, miraculous process through which consciousness awakens to its own creative nature, through which the human recognizes its divine essence, through which the creature remembers itself as creator. This second birth is not distant spiritual achievement, but immediate possibility, available not through arduous practice, not through moral perfection, not through religious observance, but through simple shift in identity from external to internal, from effect to cause, from created to creator. Most experience themselves primarily as physical beings navigating material world, as bodies moving through space, as personalities formed by circumstance, as characters shaped by experience. From this perspective, creation appears as something that happens to you rather than from you, as condition to be managed rather than expression to be directed, as external reality to be accommodated rather than internal state made manifest. The second birth reverses this perspective. It reveals you not as physical being occasionally having spiritual experience, but as spiritual consciousness temporarily expressing through physical form, not as human entity containing spark of divine, but as divine awareness experiencing through human vehicle, not as creature limited by circumstance, but as creator expressing through circumstance itself. This reversal, this radical shift in identification, transforms not just spiritual understanding, but practical experience of manifestation. For when identity transfers from created to creator, from effect to cause, from recipient to source, creation itself transforms from arduous achievement to natural expression, from difficult process to effortless unfoldment. The second birth occurs not through accumulating more spiritual knowledge, not through perfecting manifestation technique, not through purifying human character, but through genuine recognition of what has always been true beneath the appearance of separation, beneath the illusion of limitation, beneath the temporary experience of partial self, divided from its own creative essence. How do we facilitate this recognition in practical terms? Not through force but through surrender, through gently releasing identification with what is not essential self to discover what remains, when all temporary, all conditioned, all acquired identity falls away. Tonight, as you rest in quiet darkness that mirrors the inner space we explore, I invite you to practice this gentle releasing, this soft surrender, this quiet letting go of identification with what you are not, to reveal what you have always been beneath all temporary expressions, all passing states, all changing forms. Begin by bringing awareness to the body, to this miraculous physical vehicle through which consciousness experiences material realm. Notice how easily you say my body rather than I am body. In this simple phrase lies profound truth, that you are not the body but the awareness that experiences through body, not the physical form but the consciousness that animates physical form, not the temporary vehicle but the eternal presence expressing through vehicle itself. From this recognition, gently shift attention from body to the thoughts flowing through awareness. Notice how these mental movements arise, develop, dissolve like clouds passing through vast sky. Notice how you can observe these thoughts without becoming them, witness their appearance without identifying with their content. In this witnessing lies another revelation, that you are not your thoughts but the consciousness that perceives thoughts, not the mental activity, but the awareness within which all mental activity occurs. Now bring attention to emotions flowing through your experience, to the feelings that arise in response to thoughts, to memories, to anticipations. Notice how these emotions too can be observed, witnessed, experienced without becoming identity. You say I feel anger, rather than I am anger. I experience sadness rather than I am sadness. In this distinction lies further revelation, that you are not your emotions but the awareness that experiences emotions, not the feelings themselves but the consciousness within which all feelings arise, develop, dissolve. Having recognized that you are neither body, nor thoughts nor emotions, neither physical form, nor mental activity, nor emotional response, a question naturally arises. What remains when all these temporary aspects of experience are recognized as expressions rather than essence? Who am I beneath all passing states, all changing conditions, all temporary identifications? What remains is consciousness itself, pure awareness, witnessing presence, the observing eye, that experiences all but becomes nothing it experiences. This consciousness, this essential self, is not something you possess but what you are, not attribute of being, but being itself, not an aspect of identity, but the very ground from which all identity emerges as temporary expression, as passing manifestation, as momentary crystallization of infinite potential into particular form. This recognition, this remembrance of true identity beyond all temporary self-concepts, is the second birth Scripture describes, not physical emergence from mother's womb, but spiritual awakening from illusion of separation, not biological beginning but conscious remembrance, not entry into world, but recognition of your nature as the very awareness within which all worlds appear, through which all experience flows, as which all reality expresses. From this recognition, creation itself transforms. No longer do you approach manifestation as human entity, trying to influence external reality, through acquired technique, through applied method, through perfected practice. Instead, you recognize yourself as the very creative principle, through which all reality forms, as the consciousness whose nature is to manifest its states, as corresponding conditions, to express its assumptions as equivalent circumstances, to create worlds through the simple, natural radiance of its own divine being. This shift from experiencing yourself as manifester using principles, to recognizing yourself as the principle itself expressing through particular focus of attention, liberates creation from effort, from struggle, from the very tension that blocks rather than facilitates the natural flow of consciousness into form. As you drift towards sleep tonight, crossing threshold between waking and dreaming, between conscious and subconscious, between directed and spontaneous creation, allow this recognition to permeate not just intellectual understanding, but felt reality. Experience yourself not as body preparing for sleep, but as consciousness temporarily expressing through body. Know yourself not as personality with particular history, but as eternal awareness, experiencing through personality. Recognize yourself not as human using spiritual principles, but as divine principle itself expressing through human form. And from this recognition, this remembered identity beyond all temporary self-concepts, feel how manifestation transforms from something you do to what you naturally are, from achievement to expression, from becoming to being. Feel how creation flows not from effort, but from essence, not from struggle, but from state, not from doing, but from the simple, effortless radiance of consciousness, knowing itself as the singular creative power, from which all experience emerges as perfect reflection, as faithful expression, as inevitable manifestation of its own divine nature. The second birth, not distant spiritual achievement, but immediate awakening, available in this very moment, through simple shift in identification from what changes to what remains unchanged, from what comes and goes to what is eternally present, from what you experience, to what you essentially are, beneath all experience, beyond all condition, prior to all manifestation. For when consciousness awakens to its own creative nature, when human remembers its divine essence, when the creature recognizes itself as creator, manifestation becomes not arduous journey, but joyful expression, the natural, effortless, inevitable unfoldment of your own divine nature into forms that reflect, express, and celebrate the infinite potential, the boundless creativity, the unlimited love that constitutes the very essence of what you have always been, what you will always be, what you are in this eternal moment we call now. As our journey continues in this sacred hour, let us expand our understanding of conscious creation beyond the familiar territory of personal desire into the broader landscape of collective transformation. For while manifestation certainly includes the fulfillment of individual wishes, the creation of specific circumstances, conditions, experiences that enhance personal life, its deeper purpose, its more profound expression, lies in something far greater than private satisfaction, individual comfort, or separate achievement. The highest use of your creative power, the most expanded expression of your manifestation capacity, emerges not when consciousness focuses exclusively on personal desires, but when it recognizes itself as channel, through which universal love, wisdom, healing flows into collective experience, into shared reality, into the world itself. Most approach manifestation primarily through lens of separate self, asking what I can create for my benefit, for my fulfillment, for my progress. And while this focus certainly falls within legitimate domain of conscious creation, it represents elementary rather than advanced application of the creative principle, initial rather than mature expression of the divine power that constitutes your essential nature. Beyond personal desire lies realm of impersonal love, of creation motivated not by what separate self can gain, but by what universal self can give, not by what individual can receive, but by what divine within can express, not by what human can accumulate, but by what eternal can share through particular focus of consciousness you call your own. This shift from creating for self to creating through self transforms not just results of manifestation but experience of the manifestation process itself. It liberates creation from the inherent limitations of personal perspective, from the inevitable restrictions of individual viewpoint, from the natural boundaries of separate identity. It opens consciousness to creative impulses, divine inspirations, universal promptings that transcend what personality alone could conceive, could desire, could even imagine possible. How do we access this expanded creative capacity in practical terms? Not through denying personal desires, not through rejecting individual preferences, not through suppressing natural human wishes, but through recognizing these desires, preferences, wishes as potential channels through which universal can express into particular, through which eternal can manifest into temporal, through which infinite can flow into finite. Begin by bringing gentle awareness to one desire currently living within your consciousness, one vision, one intention, one creation you feel drawn to manifest. Now, instead of approaching this desire solely through lens of how it will benefit you personally, expand perspective to include larger significance, broader impact, more inclusive meaning of this same creation. Ask, how might this desire, if fulfilled, serve not just my individual satisfaction, but collective elevation? How could this manifestation contribute not only to my personal comfort, but to greater harmony, deeper understanding, expanded love in the environments through which I move? What purpose beyond private benefit might this creation serve in the larger tapestry of life itself? Let answers arise naturally, without force, without predetermined conclusion, without the ego's tendency to manufacture spiritual-sounding justifications for what remains essentially self-centered desire. For the expansion we explore emerges not from mental gymnastics, but from genuine shift in perspective, from authentic movement of consciousness, beyond limitations of separate self, into more inclusive, more connected, more universal awareness of creation's purpose, of manifestation's meaning, of desire's deeper significance. As perspective expands, notice how the energy of desire itself transforms, how its vibrational signature shifts from the contracted frequency of wanting to the expanded radiation of giving, from the tense vibration of seeking to the open field of sharing, from the anxious quality of trying to get to the peaceful nature of allowing to flow. This shift in energy, in the very frequency consciousness emits as it holds intention, accelerates manifestation, not through increased effort, but through greater alignment with the universal creative principle itself, which gives continuously, shares endlessly, expresses eternally without depletion, without diminishment, without the limitation inherent in creation motivated by separate self seeking to acquire what it believes it lacks. Tonight, as you rest in gentle darkness that mirrors the infinite field we explore, I invite you to practice this expanded approach to manifestation with one specific desire. Feel how different the creative process becomes when intention includes not just personal benefit, but collective contribution, not just individual satisfaction, but universal expression, not just private fulfillment, but shared elevation. This inclusion, this broadening of creative purpose beyond separate self, does not diminish the manifestation power focused on your own experience. It magnifies that power through alignment with larger currents, deeper purposes, vaster movements of the creative principle itself. For when personal desire harmonizes with universal intention, when individual creation aligns with collective elevation, manifestation flows not just from the limited resources of separate identity, but from the infinite abundance of universal consciousness, expressing through particular focus you call your own. As you practice this expanded creation, you may notice resistance arise, the habitual mind questioning whether focus beyond personal desire diminishes, rather than enhances manifestation potential, whether attention to collective benefit dilutes rather than concentrates creative power. This doubt is natural, conditioned by lifetime of approaching creation primarily through lens of separate self, of individual gain, of personal advantage. When this resistance appears, remember that you are not being asked to abandon personal desires, but to recognize their potential connection to larger purposes, their possible alignment with broader intentions, their natural harmony with universal movement toward greater expression of love, of wisdom, of beauty, of all qualities that constitute the essential nature of consciousness itself. For the personal and universal are not opposing forces, but concentric circles, with individual desire potentially serving as specific expression of more inclusive intention, with separate self potentially functioning as particular channel for more universal consciousness, with human creation potentially operating as focused manifestation of more divine purpose seeking expression through the unique configuration of awareness you call your own. As you drift towards sleep tonight, hold one desire in this expanded awareness, feeling its potential not just for personal fulfillment, but for collective contribution, sensing its capacity not just for individual satisfaction, but for universal expression, recognizing its possibility, not just for private benefit, but for shared elevation of the environments through which you move, the relationships within which you participate, the world itself you help to create through the quality of consciousness you bring to each moment, each interaction, each creative act. And from this expanded awareness, this more inclusive perspective on the purpose of creation itself, feel how manifestation transforms from merely getting what personality wants to allowing what divinity within seeks to express, from simply fulfilling separate desires to serving as channel, through which universal love creates particular forms, specific experiences, unique contributions, that could emerge only through the individual focus of consciousness, that constitutes your essential gift to life itself. Beyond personal desires lies not rejection of individuality, but recognition of its sacred purpose, to serve as unique expression of universal consciousness, as specific channel for infinite love, as particular focus through which the eternal creates in time, through which the unlimited manifests in form, through which the divine experiences itself, through the miracle of human awareness aligned with its own highest nature, its own deepest purpose, its own most authentic expression in the world. It creates anew in each moment, through the power of conscious loving attention. In the sacred silence of this moment, let us explore a fundamental truth about consciousness and creation, a principle so essential to manifestation that without its recognition we operate with fragmented power, with divided energy, with the inherent limitation that comes from experiencing self as isolated entity creating in separate reality rather than individualized focus of unified field manifesting through particular expression. This principle, this foundational understanding recognizes consciousness not as possession of separate beings but as singular field within which all beings arise, through which all experience flows, as which all reality expresses. Not as divided territory parceled among individual owners, but as unified awareness experiencing through countless centers, through infinite perspectives, through endless configurations of the same essential substance. Most experience consciousness as personal property, as my awareness contained within boundaries of individual identity, operating within limits of separate self, functioning as isolated entity, navigating independent world. From this perspective, creation appears challenging precisely because it seems to require influence across imagined boundary between internal consciousness and external reality, between subjective experience and objective world, between me and here and universe out there. The unified field understanding dissolves this illusory boundary. It reveals consciousness as the very substance of all experience, the awareness within which both subjective and objective arise, the field through which both personal and universal express, the singular reality appearing as multiple entities, distinct objects, separate experiences through process. Philosopher Alan Watts described as the universe peopling rather than people universing. This recognition transforms manifestation from effort to push against seemingly separate reality into alignment with field that already includes all possible expressions, all potential forms, all conceivable experiences. It shifts creation from trying to make something happen in world perceived as other to allowing something to express from field recognized as self, as essence, as the very awareness through which all perception occurs. How do we access this unified understanding in practical terms? Not through intellectual concept alone, not through mere philosophical agreement, not through abstract theory divorced from lived experience, but through direct recognition of the field nature of consciousness itself, through actual perception, felt reality, embodied knowing of awareness as space within which all phenomena appear rather than as content appearing within that space. Tonight, as you rest in gentle darkness, I invite you to explore this field nature through simple yet profound practice. Begin by bringing attention to the space of awareness within which all current experience arises, the field in which physical sensations appear, emotional responses flow, thoughts move, external sounds register. Notice how this awareness functions as container rather than content, as context rather than object, as the knowing space within which all known phenomena emerge, develop, dissolve. Now, with gentle curiosity, inquire, what is the nature of this aware space? Does it have boundaries, borders, edges that separate it from what it contains, or does it permeate all it holds, interpenetrate all it embraces, exist as the very substance of what appears within it? Let recognition arise naturally, without force, without predetermined conclusion, without conceptual overlay. Feel the actual experience of awareness as field rather than as object, as the open cognizant space within which all appears rather than as something itself appearing, as the knowing presence that perceives rather than as perception itself, as the consciousness that experiences rather than as the content of experience. From this recognition, this direct perception of awareness as field, the artificial boundary between self and world begins to dissolve. The imagined separation between inner and outer starts to fade. The illusory division between personal consciousness and universal reality slowly disappears, revealing not two realities but one field, expressing through infinite variations, through endless forms, through countless experiences of the same essential awareness. This dissolving, this recognition of fundamental unity underlying apparent diversity transforms not just spiritual understanding but practical experience of manifestation itself. For when consciousness recognizes its field nature, creation shifts from trying to influence separate reality to allowing unified field to express through particular focus, through specific intention, through individual perspective that remains unique without being separate, distinct without being divided, personal without being isolated. As you rest in this unified recognition, bring to awareness one desire, one intention, one creation you've been holding as personal goal, as individual achievement, as separate attainment. Now, from field perspective, reframe this same desire not as something you as separate self must make happen in external world, but as potential already existing within unified field, seeking expression through particular focus of consciousness you call your own. Feel how different this approach is from typical manifestation practice. Feel how it dissolves the struggle inherent in creating a cross-imagined boundary between self and world. Feel how it transforms manifestation from effort to push against seemingly separate reality into alignment with field that already contains all possibilities, awaiting only conscious selection, specific focus, particular attention to express through individualized awareness into shared experience. This perspective, this recognition of desire as field potential seeking expression rather than as personal lack seeking fulfillment, accelerates manifestation not through increased effort but through decreased resistance, not through greater force but through deeper alignment. Not through more doing but through truer being in harmony with the unified nature of consciousness itself. As you practice this unified perspective, certain qualities naturally emerge to support manifestation not as techniques but as expressions of deeper understanding. First among these is profound trust in the wisdom of the field itself, recognition that the same intelligence that coordinates galaxies, that orchestrates ecosystems, that maintains the precise balance of countless interdependent systems operates through your particular consciousness, through your specific desires, through your unique contributions to the greater whole. This trust, this confidence in field wisdom rather than merely personal perspective allows release of the anxious energy that often accompanies creation motivated by separate self. It dissolves the desperate quality that emerges when manifestation appears to depend solely on individual effort, on isolated action, on the limited resources of personality alone rather than on alignment with the infinite abundance, the boundless creativity, the unlimited potential of the unified field itself. Second is genuine recognition of all beings, all circumstances, all experiences as expressions of the same field, as unique configurations of the same consciousness, as particular manifestations of the same awareness, as specific forms of the same essence that constitutes your own true nature. This recognition dissolves the oppositional energy that blocks creation when others appear as obstacles, when circumstances seem as hindrances, when experiences register as problems rather than as aspects of the same field, reorganizing itself in perfect response to the focus of attention, to the quality of assumption, to the nature of consciousness expressed through individual awareness. And third is peaceful allowing of manifestation to unfold according to field wisdom rather than personal timeline, through intelligence beyond individual perspective, through harmony beyond separate understanding, through orchestration beyond isolated comprehension. This allowing transforms waiting from passive endurance to active trust, from frustrated marking of time to conscious participation in perfect unfoldment, guided by wisdom far more comprehensive, far more loving, far more perfect than personal viewpoint could demand, orchestrate, or even imagine possible. As you drift towards sleep tonight, rest in this unified field recognition. Feel how it transforms not just your approach to manifestation but your entire experience of existence itself. Feel how it dissolves the fundamental anxiety that accompanies perception of self as separate entity navigating independent reality. Feel how it resolves the basic fear that emerges from identification with isolated consciousness, vulnerable to circumstances perceived as other, as foreign, as potentially threatening to well-being, to security, to the very continuation of personal existence. For when consciousness recognizes its field nature, when awareness perceives itself as the unified reality within which all experience occurs rather than as content occurring within that reality, creation transforms from anxious struggle against seemingly separate world into joyful expression of the infinite potential, the boundless creativity, the unlimited love that constitutes the essential nature of the field itself. The unified field, not abstract concept but lived reality, not philosophical theory but practical foundation for manifestation beyond struggle, beyond effort, beyond the inherent limitations of creation, approached through perspective of separate self navigating independent world rather than individualized focus of singular consciousness creating through unique expression of its own divine nature. As night enfolds us in its velvet embrace, let us explore a principle so fundamental to conscious creation, so essential to understanding manifestation, that without its recognition we remain forever confused by the relationship between internal state and external experience. I speak of what might be called the cosmic mirror, that perfect reflection that exists between the consciousness that perceives and the reality it experiences. This principle, this absolute law, reveals that what appears as out there emerges not independent of the awareness perceiving it, but as precise reflection of that very awareness, as exact expression of its nature, as perfect correspondence to its state. The world you experience is not separate reality happening to you, but mirrored manifestation happening from you. Not external territory navigated by consciousness, but projected territory created by consciousness. Not objective dimension existing apart from subjective awareness, but extension of that awareness itself into form, into circumstance, into the appearance of materiality. Most approach life as series of encounters with independent reality, with people, events, conditions existing separately from the consciousness experiencing them. They believe external cause is internal, that circumstance creates state, that what happens out there determines what is experienced in here. And in this reversal of the actual relationship between consciousness and form, they surrender creative power, abandoning sovereignty to the very reflection mistaken for cause. The cosmic mirror principle restores this sovereignty through recognition of consciousness as sole creator of experience, not through denial of the world's appearance, but through understanding of its nature as projection rather than independent reality, as effect rather than cause, as perfect correspondence to the state from which it is perceived. This understanding transforms approach to manifestation from attempting to change external conditions through force, through manipulation, through action directed at seemingly separate reality, to changing internal state through assumption, through identification, through conscious embodiment of the qualities, the energies, the vibrations desired to see reflected in experience. For the mirror cannot show what is not presented to it. The reflection cannot express what is not embodied before it. The external cannot manifest what is not first assumed within the consciousness, from which all external emerges as perfect correspondence, as exact reflection, as precise manifestation of its own nature. How might we apply this understanding in practical terms? Not through trying to convince intellectual mind of abstract principle, not through forcing belief in metaphysical concept, not through mentally asserting law divorced from direct experience, but through genuine exploration of the correspondence that already exists between internal state and external reflection, through honest recognition of how current experience perfectly mirrors present consciousness, through authentic acknowledgement of the exact correlation between inner condition and outer circumstance. Tonight, as you rest in gentle darkness, I invite you to practice this recognition with one specific aspect of current experience. Choose area where external seems particularly challenging, where circumstance appears especially resistant, where conditions feel notably opposed to conscious desire. Now with compassionate clarity rather than harsh judgment, with gentle honesty rather than brutal criticism, inquire, how might this external reflection perfectly correspond to internal state? What aspect of my own consciousness might be expressing as this precise experience? What quality of my own awareness might be manifesting as this exact circumstance? Let recognition arise naturally without force, without predetermined conclusion, without defensive rejection of what might initially appear uncomfortable. For the mirror reflects not just conscious intention, but entire spectrum of awareness, including what remains hidden in shadow, what operates beneath surface, what exists as unconscious pattern, belief, assumption shaping experience, without deliberate choice. Perhaps financial limitation reflects not just conscious belief about money, but deeper association between abundance and unworthiness. Perhaps physical condition mirrors not just thoughts about health, but emotional patterns held in cellular memory. Perhaps relationship dynamic reflects not just conscious intention toward partnership, but unconscious expectations formed through early experience of connection. These recognitions are not failures, but revelations, not evidence of manifestation inadequacy, but illumination of the perfect correspondence that always exists between consciousness and form, between internal state and external reflection, between the awareness that creates and the reality it experiences as precise manifestation of its own nature. From this recognition, this honest acknowledgement of current correspondence, genuine transformation becomes possible, not through fighting against reflection, but through changing what is reflected, not through manipulating external, but through shifting internal, not through doing more in the world, but through being different in consciousness itself. As you practice this principle tonight, you may notice resistance arise, the habitual mind questioning whether simple shift in consciousness can actually transform seemingly solid circumstances, whether internal change can genuinely reorganize external conditions, whether subjective state can really reshape objective reality. This doubt is natural, conditioned by lifetime of believing in the primacy of physical, in the separation of consciousness from form, in the independence of external from internal. When this doubt appears, return attention not to abstract principle, but to direct experience, to the perfect correspondence that already exists between emotional state and perceptual filter, between mental focus and interpreted meaning, between consciousness quality and reality experience. These correlations, these connections, these correspondences reveal in immediate experience the absolute relationship between the awareness that perceives and the world it encounters as reflection of itself. Consider how differently the same circumstance registers when experienced through different states. How financial situation that appears as limitation when consciousness resonates with scarcity transforms into opportunity when awareness vibrates with abundance. How physical condition interpreted as problem when perceived through fear becomes pathway when experienced through trust. How relationship dynamic that feels as conflict when approached through judgment shifts into growth catalyst when met with compassion. These transformations occur not through changing external reality, but through shifting the consciousness from which reality is experienced, altering not the reflection, but what is presented to the mirror, not the effect but the cause, not the manifestation but the state manifesting as precise correspondence in the field of experience. As you drift toward sleep tonight, practice this understanding with one specific circumstance. Instead of mentally affirming abstract principle, genuinely feel shift in the consciousness that perceives this condition, moving from state that experiences circumstance as problem, as obstacle, as limitation to state that recognizes same circumstance as opportunity, as pathway, as perfectly orchestrated reflection serving the evolution of awareness itself. Feel how this shift, this genuine transformation of perceiving consciousness, changes not just interpretation of the circumstance, but experience of the circumstance itself. Feel how external begins to reorganize around new internal, how reflection transforms to correspond with shifted state, how manifestation realigns to express altered consciousness with the same precision, the same exactitude, the same perfect correspondence that has always existed between awareness and experience, between internal and external, between creator and creation. The cosmic mirror, not metaphysical concept but practical reality, not spiritual metaphor but manifestation principle operating with absolute precision, with perfect consistency, with unwavering faithfulness to the law that states, consciousness creates reality in its own image, through its own nature, as exact reflection of the state from which reality itself is perceived, experienced, and ultimately transformed through the simple yet profound recognition that what appears as out there emerges only and always from what exists in here, from the infinite, creative awareness, that is your true identity, your essential nature, your divine self expressing through the miracle of human experience. In the sanctuary of this night, as stillness deepens around us, let us explore the sublime architecture of creation itself, the perfect pattern through which consciousness manifests experience, through which potential becomes actual, through which invisible becomes visible in the realm we call physical reality. I speak of the divine pattern, that immaculate sequence, that perfect order, that flawless progression through which all manifestation unfolds from conception to birth, from impulse to expression, from assumed state to corresponding condition. Most approach creation with unconscious expectation of immediate manifestation, believing that once intention is set, once state is assumed, once emotion is generated, physical reality should instantly reorganize to reflect this new consciousness. And when manifestation appears delayed, when visible evidence seems slow to emerge, when tangible proof of creative power seems withheld, doubt arises, questions form, faith falters in the apparent gap between inner acceptance and outer appearance. Yet this gap, this space between internal shift and external reorganization, exists not as failure of manifestation principle, but as perfect expression of the divine pattern itself, which unfolds not through instant materialization, but through precise sequence, through perfect order, through flawless progression that honors the relationship between realms, between dimensions, between the subtle and the dense aspects of creation's perfect unfoldment. Understanding this pattern, recognizing its phases, honoring its progression, aligning with its perfect order, transforms waiting from anxious uncertainty to peaceful participation, from frustrated marking of time to conscious engagement with process that unfolds not according to personal timeline, but through divine wisdom, orchestrating manifestation with precision, beyond intellectual comprehension, with perfection beyond individual arrangement, with harmony beyond separate understanding. The divine pattern reveals itself through four distinct phases, four essential stages through which all creation moves from conception to birth, from invisible potential to visible expression, from assumed state to manifested reality. Each phase serves purpose not as delay but as preparation, not as obstacle but as foundation, not as postponement, but as perfect unfoldment, ensuring complete rather than partial manifestation of heart's true desire. The first phase, the primary movement in this divine sequence, is mental acceptance. In this initial stage, consciousness intellectually recognizes truth of desired state, conceptually acknowledges potential of intention, cognitively understands principle of creation. This phase, while essential as beginning, remains incomplete as soul activity. For mental acceptance without deeper embodiment creates conceptual agreement without vibrational alignment, intellectual assent without energetic correspondence, cognitive understanding without cellular knowing. The second phase, the deepening movement in this sacred progression, is emotional embodiment. In this essential stage, consciousness moves beyond intellectual concept into felt reality, beyond mental agreement into vibrational resonance, beyond cognitive understanding into energetic alignment. This phase activates creation at deeper level, engaging not just logical mind, but feeling nature, not just rational thought but intuitive knowing, not just surface consciousness but the emotional substance that gives concept weight, density, manifestation momentum. The third phase, the expansive movement in this perfect sequence, is spiritual surrender. In this transformative stage, consciousness releases attachment to particular forms, specific timelines, exact methods through which manifestation must occur. This surrender creates space for wisdom beyond personal perspective to orchestrate circumstances in ways far more elegant, far more perfect than individual mind could arrange through its own limited vision, its own restricted understanding, its own partial view of the infinitely complex, exquisitely interconnected field through which all creation manifests. The fourth phase, the culminating movement in this divine pattern, is physical manifestation. In this final stage, consciousness experiences tangible expression of assumed state, visible evidence of embodied feeling, material correspondence to surrendered intention. This manifestation emerges not through forcing but through allowing, not through making but through becoming, not through doing but through being, in perfect alignment with the state that must by universal law express as equivalent condition in the physical realm. These phases, these essential stages in the divine pattern, unfold not through arbitrary timing, but through perfect sequence, honoring the relationship between subtle and dense, between causal and manifest, between the consciousness that creates and the physical dimension that expresses this creation through perfect correspondence, through exact reflection, through precise manifestation of the state assumed, as already accomplished in the realm where all true creation begins. Tonight, as you rest in sacred darkness, I invite you to bring awareness to one manifestation currently in process, one intention already conceived, but not yet fully expressed in tangible form. Now, with gentle honesty rather than harsh judgment, with peaceful clarity rather than anxious evaluation, inquire, where in the divine pattern does this creation currently reside? Which phase is now unfolding in this perfect sequence? Let recognition arise naturally, without force, without predetermined conclusion, without the ego's insistence on manifestation status that flatters rather than reveals, that pleases rather than illuminates, that confirms assumed advancement rather than offering genuine insight into the actual phase currently expressing in this particular creation. Perhaps you'll discover that what appeared as complete assumption exists still as mental concept without emotional embodiment. Perhaps what seemed as full surrender remains partial release with subtle attachments to particular forms, specific timelines, exact methods. Perhaps what felt as final phase requires further patience as physical reorganizes around shifted consciousness through its own perfect timing, its own divine order, its own immaculate sequence. These discoveries are not failures, but illuminations, not evidence of manifestation inadequacy, but revelation of perfect process unfolding exactly as it must for desire to express, not as temporary appearance, but as sustainable reality, not as partial materialization, but as complete manifestation, not as fragmented fulfillment, but as integral expression of the wholeness assumed in consciousness as already accomplished fact. From this recognition, this honest acknowledgement of current phase, conscious participation becomes possible, not through anxious pushing against divine timing, but through peaceful alignment with perfect sequence, not through frustrated reaction to apparent delay, but through understanding acceptance of necessary progression, not through impatient forcing of manifestation, but through mature collaboration with the wisdom that knows exactly what must unfold when, how, in what order for desire to manifest not just as fleeting condition, but as enduring reality. If mental acceptance remains primary phase, deepen into emotional embodiment, shifting from intellectual understanding to felt reality, from conceptual agreement to vibrational resonance, from cognitive assent to energetic alignment. This deepening occurs not through forcing emotion, but through genuine recognition of state as present rather than future, as actual rather than potential, as accomplished fact in the realm where all true creation begins. If emotional embodiment represents current phase, move into spiritual surrender, releasing not the clarity of intention, but attachment to particular expression, not the assumed state but anxious concern about when and how state must manifest, not the feeling of fulfillment, but desperate need for immediate confirmation. This surrender creates space for field wisdom to orchestrate circumstances in perfect harmony with true rather than surface desire, with essential rather than apparent intention, with the deeper purpose beneath conscious want. If surrender marks present stage, practice peaceful allowing of physical manifestation, maintaining unwavering assumption while releasing anxious checking for evidence, holding clear intention while surrendering attachment to timeline, embodying fulfilled state while releasing concern about external reorganization. This allowing creates space for physical to align with non-physical, through its own perfect timing, its own divine progression, its own immaculate sequence, honoring the relationship between realms, between dimensions, between the subtle and the dense aspects of creation's perfect unfoldment. As you drift towards sleep tonight, rest in this understanding of divine pattern. Feel how it transforms waiting from anxious uncertainty to peaceful participation, from frustrated marking of time to conscious engagement with process that unfolds not according to personal demand, but through perfect wisdom, orchestrating manifestation with precision, beyond intellectual comprehension, with perfection beyond individual arrangement, with harmony beyond separate understanding. For when consciousness aligns with divine pattern, when awareness recognizes and honors the perfect sequence through which all creation moves from conception to birth, manifestation flows not as anxious struggle against seemingly delayed expression, but as peaceful participation in perfect unfoldment, not as frustrated pushing against apparently resistant reality, but as mature collaboration with the wisdom that knows exactly what must occur when, how, in what order for desire to manifest, not as temporary appearance, but as enduring expression of the state assumed as already accomplished in the realm where all true creation begins. The divine pattern, not arbitrary sequence but perfect progression, not random timing, but precise unfoldment, not delaying obstacle, but essential foundation ensuring manifestation emerges not as fragmentary glimpse of potential reality, but as complete expression of the wholeness already accomplished in consciousness aligned with its own creative power, its own divine nature, its own perfect expression through the miracle we call physical reality. In the intimate stillness of this hour, as night creates space for deeper contemplation, let us explore a dimension of conscious creation that transcends conventional understanding, that challenges linear perception, that reveals manifestation power beyond ordinary conception. I speak of what might be called time collapse, that mysterious, miraculous capacity of consciousness to transcend sequential unfolding, to experience fulfillment before physical expression, to access completion in the eternal now while linear awareness perceives process still in motion. Most experience time as fixed progression, as sequential movement from past through present toward future, as linear unfoldment from what was through what is toward what will be, as irreversible flow that carries consciousness from memory through experience toward anticipation. From this perspective, manifestation appears as lengthy journey, as prolonged movement from current absence toward future presence, from present limitation toward eventual fulfillment, from existing lack toward distant satisfaction of desire. Yet the deepest spiritual traditions, the most profound mystical insights, and now even the frontier of quantum physics suggest something radically different, that time as sequential progression exists, not as absolute reality but as perceptual framework, not as fundamental condition but as interpretive lens, not as fixed dimension but as flexible experience, shaped by the very consciousness perceiving it. This understanding reveals time not as independent territory through which consciousness must journey, but as expression of consciousness itself, not as external condition that dictates experience, but as internal construct that reflects the state from which it is perceived. And in this revelation emerges profound manifestation possibility, the capacity to collapse what appears as necessary duration between desire and fulfillment, to transcend what seems as required interval between intention and manifestation, to experience completion in the timeless now while linear awareness continues its sequential perception of process still unfolding. How might we access this mysterious capacity in practical terms? Not through trying to manipulate external time, not through attempting to force accelerated manifestation, not through anxious pushing against natural unfoldment, but through shifting relationship with time itself, through transcending identification with linear progression, to recognize the eternal dimension where all exists simultaneously, where all possibilities express concurrently, where all potential manifests already in the timeless reality beyond sequential perception. Tonight, as you rest in sacred darkness that mirrors the infinite field we explore, I invite you to experiment with this transcendent perspective. Begin by bringing awareness to one desire currently experienced as future fulfillment, one intention perceived as still in process of manifestation, one creation sensed as movement from current absence toward eventual presence. Now, instead of placing this fulfillment on imaginary timeline extending beyond present moment, experiment with radical shift in perception, with genuine recognition of fulfillment as existing now in the timeless dimension from which all time emerges, with authentic acknowledgement of completion as present reality in the eternal realm that transcends sequential unfolding, with peaceful embodiment of the state already accomplished in the infinite field that contains all possibilities as simultaneous rather than sequential expressions. This recognition, this shift from temporal to eternal perception, is not pretense, it is not self-deception, it is not denial of linear appearance. It is acknowledgement of larger truth, that what consciousness experiences as progression through time occurs within timeless awareness, that contains all moments simultaneously, that holds all possibilities concurrently, that embraces all potential as already expressed in the eternal now from which past, present, and future emerge as interpretive frameworks rather than absolute realities. From this timeless perspective, this recognition of desire already fulfilled in the eternal dimension, consciousness radiates different frequency than from linear perception of desire as future attainment. It emits completion rather than seeking, wholeness rather than fragmentation, presence rather than absence. And this altered vibration, this shifted energy, this transformed state accelerates manifestation not through manipulation of external time, but through transcendence of the very perception that places fulfillment in distant future, rather than accomplished present within timeless reality. As you practice this time collapse, certain qualities support the shift not as techniques but as expressions of deeper understanding. First among these is peaceful presence in the now, genuine inhabiting of current moment, not as fragment torn from past and future, but as gateway to the eternal, as portal to the timeless, as access point to the infinite dimension where all exists simultaneously beyond sequential perception. This presence, This complete inhabiting of now dissolves the anxious energy that stretches consciousness between regret about past and worry about future, between memory of what was and anticipation of what might be. It gathers fragmented awareness into unified focus, concentrated attention, singular perception that accesses the power of the eternal now, where all creation occurs, all manifestation emerges, all possibility expresses beyond the illusory division of time into separate compartments experienced as disconnected moments. Second is deliberate disidentification with linear storyline, conscious release of attachment to particular narrative about how desire must unfold across time, about what sequence manifestation must follow, about what timeline creation must honor in its expression from invisible potential to visible actuality. This releasing, this surrender of fixed story about necessary progression, creates space for manifestation to occur through pathways beyond linear conception, through sequences beyond chronological imagination, through timelines beyond sequential projection. And third is genuine embodiment of the feeling of fulfillment, now not as imagined future, but as present reality, not as visualized possibility, but as current actuality, not as anticipated eventuality, but as immediate experience transcending the very perception that places satisfaction in distant time, rather than accessible dimension available through shift in consciousness itself. This embodiment, this feeling into completion as present rather than future state, activates manifestation power beyond conceptual understanding, beyond intellectual agreement, beyond mental assent to principle, without energetic alignment with the vibrational reality of desire, already fulfilled in the timeless dimension from which all time emerges as perceptual framework rather than fundamental condition. As you drift towards sleep tonight, crossing threshold from waking to dreaming, from conscious to subconscious, from directed to spontaneous creation, maintain this timeless perspective. Feel how it transforms waiting from anxious anticipation to peaceful knowing, from frustrated marking of days to quiet certainty, transcending days themselves, from impatient counting of moments to recognition of the eternal moment that contains all unfoldment as already complete in the dimension beyond sequential perception. For when consciousness collapses time, when awareness transcends linear progression to access the eternal now where all exists simultaneously, manifestation transforms from lengthy journey to immediate recognition, from distant achievement to present embodiment, from future attainment to current revelation of what has always existed in the timeless reality, that is your true home, your essential nature, your divine inheritance beyond the temporary experience of sequential progression, through what appears as separate moments but reveals itself, in awakened perception, as the singular eternal now containing all possibilities, all potentials, all expressions of the infinite field of consciousness, that is your deepest identity, your truest self, your most authentic being. As our journey continues in this gentle night, let us explore a state of consciousness that represents not just another approach to manifestation, but its most mature expression, its most advanced embodiment, its most effortless demonstration. I speak of walking in grace, that sublime state where creation flows not from striving but from being, not from doing but from allowing, not from separate self-manipulating external reality, but from divine self-expressing through perfectly aligned human instrument. Grace in its esoteric meaning describes not external favor bestowed by distant deity, but internal harmony with the creative principle itself, alignment so complete, resonance so perfect, attunement so absolute, that manifestation occurs not through effort but through essence, not through technique but through nature, not through acquired skill but through remembered identity, beyond all acquisition, all development, all becoming. Most approach manifestation primarily through methodology, through specific visualization practices, particular affirmation sequences, precise emotional generation techniques designed to produce desired results through consciously directed activity. And while these approaches certainly serve valuable purpose in developmental stages of conscious creation, they represent preliminary rather than culminating expression, initial rather than mature demonstration, beginning rather than fulfillment of the creative journey itself. Walking in grace transcends methodology without denying its value, moves beyond technique without rejecting its purpose, evolves past practice without disregarding its role in the necessary progression from unconscious to conscious to superconscious creation, from manifesting without awareness to manifesting with deliberate intent to manifesting through simple, effortless expression of divine nature remembered, reclaimed, fully embodied in human experience. How might we access this state of grace, this effortless creation, this natural manifestation? this walking in perfect alignment with the divine principle expressing through individualized focus of consciousness, not through more refined technique, not through better methodology, not through increased effort at conscious creation, but through genuine surrender of the very concept of technique, through authentic release of the very idea of methodology, through complete abandonment of the notion that creation requires special activity beyond simple natural expression of what you already are in your most essential nature. Begin by recognizing where in current manifestation practice you still carry the energy of trying, the subtle tension of making, the unconscious strain of believing creation depends on your activity rather than your identity, on your doing rather than your being, on your technique rather than your nature. Notice how this trying, this efforted quality, introduces vibrational confusion into the creative process itself, generating not effortless flow but subtle resistance, not natural expression but gentle obstruction to the very manifestation power attempting to channel through personal consciousness into shared experience. Tonight, as you rest in sacred quietude, I invite you to experiment with release of this trying energy, with genuine surrender of the belief that manifestation requires special effort beyond natural expression of your divine nature, with authentic abandonment of the idea that creation demands particular technique beyond simple embodiment of your eternal identity, with complete letting go of the notion that manifestation necessitates specific practice beyond peaceful assumption of the state that is your birthright, your inheritance, your most essential truth. Feel how different this approach is from typical manifestation practice. Feel how it dissolves the subtle tension that often accompanies conscious creation. Feel how it releases the gentle strain that frequently colors deliberate manifestation. Feel how it resolves the underlying anxiety that commonly shapes intentional creation approach through methodology rather than through identity, through technique rather than through nature, through special activity rather than through simple being. From this release, this surrender of efforting, notice what naturally emerges, not forced visualization but spontaneous seeing from the state already assumed as true, not deliberate affirmation but natural declaration flowing from identity already embraced as real, not manufactured emotion but authentic feeling arising from essence already embodied as present. This emergence, this natural expression represents grace in action, divine principle flowing through human consciousness without obstruction, without resistance, without the interference that comes from trying to create rather than allowing creation to express through what you already are in your most essential nature. As you practice this effortless creation, you may notice mind raise objections, questioning whether manifestation can possibly occur without deliberate technique, without specific methodology, without particular practice directed at producing desired result. These doubts arise not from truth but from conditioning, from belief systems suggesting creation must be difficult, manifestation must be challenging, expression must involve struggle rather than flowing as natural radiation of your own divine nature recognized, reclaimed, remembered as your most authentic identity. When these doubts appear, return attention not to abstract principle but to direct experience of how effortlessly creation occurs through aligned consciousness, through awareness in complete harmony with its own divine nature, through perception in perfect resonance with its own eternal identity, through being in absolute attunement with its own essential truth beyond all temporary appearances, all passing states, all changing conditions mistaken for fundamental reality. Consider how breath flows without technique, how heart beats without methodology, how countless bodily functions maintain perfect balance without deliberate practice directed at their continuation. These natural processes, these effortless expressions, demonstrate the divine principle operating not through special effort, but through simple alignment with nature itself, with essence itself, with the truth of what already is beyond all trying, all striving, all attempting to make happen what occurs naturally when consciousness recognizes and embodies its own most authentic being. As you drift towards sleep tonight, practice this walking in grace with one specific desire, not through visualizing its fulfillment as future possibility, but through recognizing its presence as current reality in the eternal dimension that transcends linear perception, not through affirming its existence as distant attainment, but through acknowledging its expression as immediate manifestation in the timeless realm that contains all fulfillment as already accomplished fact, not through generating emotion about its eventual appearance but through feeling its current embodiment as natural state requiring no special activity beyond simple recognition of what is already true in the consciousness that creates all experience through the quality of its own divine being. Feel how this approach, this walking in grace, transforms manifestation from arduous journey to peaceful recognition, from lengthy process to immediate realization, from future achievement to present revelation of what has always existed in the eternal reality that is your true home, your essential nature, your divine inheritance beyond the temporary identification with separate self, believing it must make creation happen rather than allowing creation to express through what it already is in its most authentic truth. For when consciousness walks in grace, when awareness aligns completely with its own divine nature, manifestation flows not as special achievement but as natural expression, not as unusual demonstration but as inevitable radiation, not as extraordinary accomplishment, but as ordinary emanation of the creative principle itself, channeling through human instrument in perfect harmony with its own most essential identity, beyond all effort, all striving, all attempt to become what it already is in the timeless reality that transcends all becoming, all development, all progression from what appears as separate self to what reveals itself, in awakened perception, as the divine self that has always been your truest nature, your deepest identity, your most authentic being expressing through the miracle of human experience. In the sacred quietude of this night, as the world surrenders to gentle darkness, let us explore a dimension of consciousness that transcends ordinary perception, that liberates creative power from temporal constraints, that reveals manifestation capacity beyond conventional understanding. I speak of the eternal present, that timeless now which contains not just momentary experience, but all experience. Current reality, but all reality, not just present circumstance, but all possibility existing simultaneously in the infinite field we call consciousness itself. Most experience present as fleeting instant, as brief transition between remembered past and anticipated future, as temporary threshold crossed in linear progression from what was toward what will be, as momentary pause in continuous movement through sequential time experienced as fundamental condition, rather than perceptual framework. From this perspective, manifestation appears as prolonged process, as extended journey from current absence toward future presence, from existing limitation toward eventual fulfillment, from present desire toward distant satisfaction. Yet the deepest spiritual traditions, the most profound mystical insights, and now even the leading edge of quantum physics suggest something radically different, that the present is not passing moment, but eternal dimension, not transient experience but fundamental reality, not temporary condition but the very ground of being within which all experience arises, through which all reality expresses, as which all manifestation occurs beyond the illusory division of time into separate compartments labeled past, present, and future. This understanding reveals the now not as brief interval between what was and what will be, but as timeless dimension containing all that was, is, and will be, as simultaneous expressions, as concurrent manifestations, as present realities accessible not through linear progression, but through shifted perception, through consciousness that recognizes the eternal present, not as concept but as lived experience, not as abstract theory, but as direct realization, not as philosophical proposition, but as immediate knowing beyond all conceptual understanding, all intellectual agreement, all mental assent without embodied recognition. How might we access this eternal present in practical terms? Not through trying to extend momentary experience, not through attempting to freeze passing time, not through effort to hold what appears as fleeting instant, but through genuine shift in identification, through conscious transfer of attention from temporary content arising within awareness to timeless awareness itself, from passing phenomena appearing in presence to presence itself, from changing experience flowing through consciousness to unchanging consciousness within which all experience flows as varied expressions of its own eternal nature. Tonight, as you rest in gentle darkness, I invite you to experiment with this shift in identification. Begin by bringing attention not to particular thoughts, emotions, or sensations currently arising in awareness, but to the awareness itself within which all thoughts, emotions, and sensations appear, develop, and dissolve like waves forming, expressing, and returning to the same ocean, different in form but identical in substance, varied in appearance but unified in essence, distinct in expression but inseparable in fundamental nature. Notice how this awareness, this presence remains unchanged by the changing content it contains, unaltered by the varying phenomena it embraces, undivided by the diverse experiences it witnesses. Feel how it exists not as passing moment, but as eternal dimension, not as temporary condition, but as fundamental reality, not as brief interval, but as the very ground of being that has always been, is now, and ever shall be, the essential nature of consciousness itself, beyond all temporary identifications, all passing states, all changing conditions mistaken for primary identity. From this recognition, this identification with eternal presence rather than passing content, bring awareness to one desire currently experienced as future fulfillment, as distant attainment, as eventual manifestation beyond present reality. Now, instead of placing this fulfillment on imaginary timeline, extending from current absence toward future presence. Recognize it as existing now in the eternal dimension that transcends linear perception, as present reality in the timeless realm that contains all possibility as simultaneous expression, as immediate manifestation in the infinite field that embraces all potential as concurrent rather than sequential reality. This recognition, this shift from linear to eternal perception, transforms manifestation from extended process to immediate realization, from prolonged journey to direct access, from future attainment to present embodiment of what already exists in the timeless dimension that is your true home, your essential nature, your divine inheritance beyond the temporary experience of sequential progression through apparently separate moments. As you practice this eternal perspective, certain qualities naturally emerge to support manifestation not as techniques, but as expressions of deeper understanding. First among these is profound peace with what appears as current circumstance, not as resignation to limitation, but as recognition that what seems as temporary condition exists within rather than as eternal presence, as passing expression within rather than as fundamental identity, as momentary manifestation within rather than as essential nature of the timeless awareness that contains all conditions as varied expressions of its own infinite potential. This peace, this tranquil acceptance dissolves the anxious energy that often accompanies manifestation approach through struggle against current reality, through rejection of present circumstance, through resistance to what is in desperate reach for what is desired. It creates space for desire to manifest not through opposition to existing condition, but through recognition of desired state as already present in the eternal dimension accessible, not through future time, but through shifted perception in this very moment. Second is genuine detachment from particular timelines, from fixed expectations about when desire must manifest, from rigid projections about how fulfillment must unfold, from limited conceptions about what path creation must follow in its expression from invisible potential to visible actuality. This detachment, this divine indifference to temporal specifics, liberates manifestation from the constricting energy of demand, from the limiting vibration of expectation, from the contracting frequency of requirement that often blocks rather than facilitates the natural flow of creation from eternal possibility into temporal experience. And third is complete embodiment of the feeling of fulfillment now, not as distant emotion eventually to be experienced, but as present reality immediately accessible, not as future state ultimately to be attained, but as eternal truth instantly available, not as delayed satisfaction finally to be reached, but as timeless completion already embraced in the awareness that transcends all delay, all postponement, all deferral of what exists as accomplished fact in the dimension beyond sequential perception. This embodiment, this feeling into completion as present rather than future state, activates manifestation power beyond ordinary understanding, beyond conventional conception, beyond limited perception confined to linear progression, rather than embracing the eternal present that contains all progression as simultaneous rather than sequential reality. As you drift towards sleep tonight, crossing threshold from conscious to subconscious, from directed to spontaneous creation, from intentional to natural manifestation, maintain this eternal perspective. Feel how it transforms waiting from anxious anticipation to peaceful embodiment, from frustrated marking of time to tranquil recognition of timeless fulfillment, from impatient counting of days to quiet certainty transcending days themselves, in the awareness that contains all time as varied expressions of its own eternal nature. For when consciousness centers in the eternal present, when awareness identifies with timeless dimension rather than temporary content, manifestation flows not as future achievement, but as present recognition, not as distant attainment, but as immediate realization, not as eventual satisfaction, but as instant embodiment of what has always existed in the infinite field of consciousness. That is your true identity, your essential nature, your divine self expressing through the miracle of human experience, in the eternal now, that contains all past, all future, all possibility as present reality awaiting only your recognition, your acknowledgement, your acceptance of what is already yours, what has always been yours, what will forever be yours in the timeless dimension, that is the very essence of what you are beyond all temporary appearances, all passing states, all changing conditions mistaken for fundamental reality. As our journey deepens in this sacred night, let us explore what might be called the culmination of conscious creation, the fulfillment of manifestation practice, the maturation of the spiritual journey itself. I speak of becoming the embodied creator, that state where manifestation flows not from occasional practice, but from consistent identity, not from periodic technique, but from continuous being, not from separated activities, but from integrated presence, expressing creative power through every thought, every feeling, every action, every moment of existence itself. Most approach manifestation as specialized activity, as particular practice separated from ordinary experience, as specific technique applied during designated periods, as distinct method utilized for special purposes, rather than as natural expression of what we are in our essential nature. They say, now I will practice visualization, or this is when I use affirmations, creating division between manifestation time and regular life, as though creation itself were compartmentalized activity, rather than continuous expression of consciousness in every moment of experience. The embodied creator transcends this division without denying its developmental value, evolves beyond this separation without rejecting its preliminary purpose, matures past this compartmentalization without disregarding its initial role in the necessary progression from unconscious to conscious, to integrated creation, from manifesting without awareness to manifesting with deliberate intent, to manifesting through consistent identity, beyond all separation between spiritual practice and everyday existence. How do we experience this integration, this embodiment, this maturation beyond divided consciousness into consistent expression of our creative nature? Not through more disciplined practice, not through better manifestation technique, not through increased spiritual activity separated from ordinary life, but through genuine recognition of creative power operating not just during designated periods, but in every moment of experience, through authentic acknowledgement of manifestation occurring, not only through special methods, but through each thought, each feeling, each assumption consciously or unconsciously held as true. Tonight, as you rest in gentle darkness, I invite you to explore this integrated perspective. Begin by bringing awareness to how manifestation principles operate, not just during deliberate practice, but through every aspect of daily experience, through casual conversations generating corresponding relationships, through habitual thoughts creating matching circumstances, through unconscious assumptions manifesting equivalent conditions, without any special technique beyond the natural expression of consciousness creating reality in its own image, through its own nature, as perfect reflection of the state assumed as true, regardless of whether that assumption occurs during designated manifestation time or in seemingly ordinary moments throughout the day. From this recognition, this understanding of creation as continuous rather than compartmentalized activity, genuine integration becomes possible, not through trying to practice manifestation techniques during every waking moment, not through attempting to consciously direct each thought toward desired outcome, not through exhausting effort to maintain perpetual state of deliberate creation, but through simple awareness of creative power operating with or without conscious direction, with or without deliberate intention, with or without specific technique in every moment of existence itself. This awareness, this recognition of yourself as creator, not just sometimes but always, not just during practice but continuously, not just when applying technique but in every moment of being, transforms manifestation from separated activity to integrated identity, from compartmentalized practice to consistent expression, from occasional doing to continuous being aligned with the creative principle itself. As the embodied creator, certain qualities naturally expressed not as acquired characteristics, but as revealed attributes of your essential nature, recognized, reclaimed, remembered as your authentic identity, beyond all temporary appearances, all passing states, all changing conditions mistaken for fundamental reality. First among these qualities is profound responsibility, not as burden, but as recognition of your role as conscious participant in the creation of experience, not as heavy obligation but as peaceful acknowledgement of your power, as deliberate shaper of circumstance, not as anxious duty, but as mature acceptance of your capacity, as intentional creator of the reality you perceive as separate, but recognize as extension of your own consciousness, manifesting through perfect correspondence between internal state and external reflection. This responsibility manifests not through trying to control every detail of experience, but through conscious choice of the state from which experience flows, not through attempting to manipulate each circumstance, but through deliberate assumption of the consciousness that manifests as corresponding condition, not through exhausting effort to make things happen, but through peaceful embodiment of the identity that naturally creates through simple, effortless expression of its own divine nature. Second is spontaneous compassion, genuine understanding of all beings as expressions of the same creative consciousness, authentic recognition of all circumstances as manifestations of states held somewhere in awareness, mature acknowledgement of all experiences as reflections corresponding perfectly to some aspect of consciousness, whether consciously chosen or unconsciously assumed. This compassion dissolves judgment, not through moral imperative, but through clear seeing, eliminates criticism not through ethical command, but through expanded understanding, transcends condemnation, not through spiritual dictate, but through direct recognition of all creation as varied expressions of the same consciousness, operating through infinite configurations, through endless forms, through boundless manifestations of its own divine nature. And third is natural creativity, effortless expression flowing not from special technique but from aligned identity, spontaneous manifestation emerging not from deliberate practice, but from conscious embodiment, continuous creation arising not from periodic activity, but from consistent state, harmonized with the creative principle itself. This creativity permeates every aspect of experience, informing casual conversations with transformative potential, imbuing routine activities with manifestation power, infusing ordinary moments with the extraordinary capacity to shape reality through the quality of consciousness embodied in each instant of existence itself. As you drift towards sleep tonight, practice this integration, this embodiment, this maturation beyond divided consciousness into consistent expression of your creative nature, not through exhausting effort to maintain perpetual state of deliberate creation, not through trying to practice manifestation techniques during every moment, not through attempting to consciously direct each thought toward desired outcome, but through simple recognition of yourself as creator, not just sometimes but always, not just during practice, but continuously, not just when applying technique but in every moment of being itself. Feel how this recognition, this acknowledgement of your nature as embodied creator, transforms not just manifestation practice, but entire experience of existence itself. Feel how it dissolves artificial boundary between spiritual activity and ordinary life, between sacred practice and secular experience, between special technique and natural being aligned with the creative principle, expressing through every aspect of consciousness, in perfect correspondence, between internal state and external reflection. For when consciousness matures into consistent recognition of its own creative nature, when awareness evolves beyond compartmentalized practice into integrated expression of its divine identity, manifestation flows not as separated activity, but as continuous revelation, not as occasional achievement, but as constant demonstration, not as periodic creation, but as perpetual unfoldment of the infinite potential, the boundless creativity, the unlimited love that constitutes the essential nature of what you have always been, what you will always be, what you are in this eternal moment expressing through the miracle of human experience, as the embodied creator walking in perfect harmony with your own divine self. In this sacred hour, as night creates space for deeper contemplation, let us explore what many consider the most challenging aspect of conscious creation, the most demanding element of manifestation practice, the most rigorous requirement of spiritual understanding itself. I speak of unwavering assumption, that quality of consciousness that maintains chosen state, not just during periods of encouragement, but through apparent contradiction, not just when circumstances align, but when conditions seem to oppose, not just in presence of confirmation, but in absence of visible evidence supporting the reality internally claimed as true. Most discover that initial assumption comes relatively easily, that first embodiment of desired state, that beginning identification with intention fulfilled, that preliminary feeling of wish accomplished arrives without exceptional difficulty, when consciousness deliberately focuses on creative visualization, on affirmative declaration, on emotional alignment with desired outcome. Yet as hours extend into days, as days lengthen into weeks, as weeks stretch into months without visible confirmation, without tangible evidence, without material proof of inner assertion, manifesting as outer experience, faith falters. Doubt emerges. Questions arise about the very principles initially embraced with confidence, with certainty, with unwavering conviction. This wavering, this oscillation between states, this fluctuation between faith and doubt, this movement between embodiment and questioning, introduces vibrational confusion into the manifestation process itself. Consciousness declares it is done in one moment, then asks, why hasn't it happened yet? In the next, it affirms, I am that which I desire to be in morning contemplation, then wonders, will I ever become what I wish to be? During evening reflection, it assumes completion during manifestation practice, then perceives incompletion during ordinary experience. And in this division, this contradiction, this internal argument, creation itself becomes confused, manifesting not clarity but chaos, not coherence but conflict, not the desired state, but the mixed vibration of alternating consciousness. The capacity to maintain unwavering assumption, to hold chosen state without vacillation, to embody desired consciousness without fluctuation, to assume intention fulfilled without oscillation regardless of appearance, of circumstance, of visible evidence supporting or contradicting internal conviction, represents not just manifestation skill, but spiritual maturity itself. For this capacity emerges not through technique but through understanding, not through method, but through recognition of the true relationship between consciousness and form, between internal and external, between the state assumed and the reality experienced, as perfect correspondence, as exact reflection, as precise manifestation of that very state. How then do we cultivate this unwavering quality, this persistence of assumption, this maintenance of state, this continuity of embodiment regardless of temporary appearance? Not through desperate clinging to belief despite evidence, not through forced positive thinking despite circumstance, not through strained affirmation despite condition, but through deeper understanding of manifestation itself, through genuine recognition of the gap between inner shift and outer reorganization as necessary phase, rather than manifestation failure, through authentic acknowledgement of the interval between internal assumption and external expression as perfect unfoldment, rather than creation breakdown, through mature acceptance of the space between consciousness transformation and circumstance, rearrangement as divine pattern, rather than principal malfunction. Tonight, as you rest in gentle darkness, I invite you to practice this unwavering assumption with one specific intention, one desire, one creation, one manifestation currently in process yet not fully expressed in visible form. Bring clear awareness to how you've been approaching this manifestation, noticing where consciousness has wavered, where assumption has fluctuated, where embodiment has oscillated between states based on external evidence rather than internal conviction, on circumstantial appearance rather than conscious choice, on visible condition rather than invisible truth, claimed as present reality regardless of temporary contradiction. Now, with compassionate honesty rather than harsh judgment, inquire what sustains my faith when evidence seems lacking, what maintains my assumption when circumstance appears contrary, what preserves my embodiment when conditions suggest manifestation failure rather than perfect unfoldment, still in process of completion. Let answers arise naturally, without force, without predetermined conclusion, without the ego's tendency to manufacture spiritual-sounding justifications that please rather than reveal, that comfort rather than illuminate, that confirm assumed advancement rather than offering genuine insight into the actual quality of faith currently operating in this particular creation. Perhaps you'll discover that faith still depends primarily on external validation, that assumption requires circumstantial support, that embodiment demands visible evidence confirming internal state as valid, as accurate, as aligned with reality perceived as separate authority, rather than perfect reflection of the very consciousness perceiving it. This discovery represents not failure but revelation, not evidence of spiritual deficiency, but illumination of the actual relationship currently existing between internal conviction and external confirmation, between consciousness assumed and circumstance accepted as authoritative validation of that assumption's truth or falsehood. From this recognition, this honest acknowledgement of where faith truly stands in relationship to circumstance, genuine transformation becomes possible, not through fighting against current condition, but through deepening understanding of the manifestation process itself, not through denying present limitation, but through expanding perspective beyond temporary appearance to eternal truth, not through rejecting visible contradiction, but through recognizing contradiction itself as necessary phase in the perfect unfoldment of consciousness creating form in its own image, through its own nature, by its own immaculate process. This deepened understanding, this expanded perspective, this recognition of manifestation as perfect process rather than instantaneous materialization, allows unwavering assumption to emerge not as desperate holding despite evidence, but as peaceful knowing beyond evidence, not as forced conviction despite circumstance, but as quiet certainty transcending circumstance, not as strained positivity despite condition, but as tranquil embodiment embracing condition, as necessary phase in the divine pattern, through which all creation moves from conception to birth in perfect sequence, in perfect timing, in perfect unfoldment, that honors the relationship between dimensions, between realms, between the subtle and the dense aspects of consciousness manifesting as physical reality. As you practice this unwavering assumption, certain qualities naturally emerge to support faith not as techniques, but as expressions of deeper understanding. First among these is profound patience with the divine pattern, genuine recognition that what appears as delay represents not manifestation failure, but perfect unfoldment, not creation breakdown but necessary progression, not principle malfunction, but immaculate sequence, honoring the relationship between realms, through which all desire moves from conceived to perceived, from assumed to expressed, from claimed in consciousness to manifested in experience. This patience, this peaceful allowing of divine timing, transforms waiting from anxious uncertainty to tranquil participation, from frustrated endurance to conscious collaboration with wisdom, orchestrating manifestation with precision, beyond intellectual comprehension, with perfection beyond individual arrangement, with harmony beyond separate understanding, limited to linear perspective, rather than embracing the eternal dimension, where all is already complete, all is already perfect, all is already manifest in the timeless reality, accessed not through future achievement, but through present recognition of what already exists beyond sequential perception. Second is gentle persistence in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not as strained emotion, but as natural state maintained through conscious choice, not as forced sensation, but as authentic experience sustained through deliberate focus, not as manufactured vibration, but as genuine frequency radiated through consistent embodiment of the consciousness that creates all experience, through the quality of its own divine being. This persistence knows no contradiction, because it recognizes external as effect rather than cause, as reflection rather than original, as expression rather than authority, determining the truth or falsehood of internal state assumed as present reality. And third is complete conviction in the absolute law that consciousness creates reality, not as abstract principle, but as lived truth, not as spiritual theory, but as practical foundation, not as religious belief, but as direct experience of the perfect correspondence that exists between the state from which world is perceived, and the world perceived as separate, but recognized as extension of the very consciousness perceiving it. This conviction stands unwavering, not because circumstance confirms, but because understanding transcends circumstance itself, not because condition validates, but because recognition supersedes condition itself, not because appearance supports, but because knowing embraces appearance as perfect phase, rather than final statement in the manifestation process unfolding through its own divine pattern. As you drift towards sleep tonight, embody this unwavering assumption with one specific desire. Feel how it transforms waiting from anxious anticipation to peaceful knowing, from frustrated marking of time to quiet certainty transcending time itself, from impatient checking for evidence to mature recognition of evidence as effect, rather than cause of the state maintained regardless of temporary appearance to the contrary. For when consciousness remains unwavering in its assumption, when awareness maintains chosen state without vacillation based on external feedback, manifestation unfolds not as uncertain possibility, but as inevitable expression, not as questionable outcome, but as guaranteed unfoldment, not as doubtful result, but as absolute certainty manifesting through perfect correspondence between the consciousness that creates and the reality it experiences as precise reflection, as exact extension, as perfect manifestation of its own divine nature expressed through unwavering assumption, maintained until manifestation completes its perfect journey from invisible conception to visible birth in the realm we call physical reality. As our journey reaches its culmination in this sacred hour, let us explore what might be called the ultimate expression of conscious creation, the highest embodiment of manifestation understanding, the complete fulfillment of spiritual realization itself. I speak of the ascended life, that state of being where consciousness lives continuously from expanded awareness, where perception operates consistently from divine perspective, where existence expresses perpetually from the recognition of oneself as the very creative principle through which all experience manifests as perfect correspondence to the state assumed as fundamental identity, beyond all temporary appearances, all passing conditions, all changing circumstances mistaken for essential reality. The ascended life represents not distant spiritual achievement reserved for special beings, but immediate possibility available through simple shift in identification, through conscious transfer of attention from temporary self to eternal self, from passing personality to permanent awareness, from transient human to transcendent divine, expressing through individualized focus of consciousness in unique configuration, in specific expression, in particular demonstration of the infinite potential that constitutes your essential nature beyond all limitation, all separation, all division between creator and creation, between perceiver and perceived, between the consciousness that manifests and the reality it experiences as perfect reflection of itself. Most approach spiritual path as progressive journey, as gradual movement from limited awareness toward expanded consciousness, as developmental sequence from contracted identity toward inclusive being, as evolutionary progression from separate self toward unified recognition of essential oneness with all that exists. And while this approach certainly serves valuable purpose in initial stages of awakening, it perpetuates subtle division between where consciousness currently stands and where it ultimately belongs, between what awareness presently embodies and what it eventually achieves, between who you now are and who you will someday become through dedicated practice, through consistent discipline, through persistent effort directed at spiritual attainment. The ascended life collapses this division through radical recognition of what has always been true beneath all appearances, that you are not becoming divine but remembering divinity, not achieving expanded consciousness, but recognizing expansion as your natural state, not evolving toward union, but awakening from the dream of separation into the reality of oneness that constitutes your fundamental nature, beyond all temporary identifications with limited self, with circumscribed awareness, with particular perspective mistaken for essential identity. How might we access this ascended life, this expanded awareness, this divine perspective, this unified consciousness in practical terms? Not through more refined technique, not through better spiritual practice, not through increased effort directed at transcendent achievement, but through genuine surrender of the very notion of progressive journey, through authentic release of the very concept of developmental sequence, through complete abandonment of the idea that awakening requires special methodology, beyond simple recognition of what has always been true beneath the illusion of separation, beneath the appearance of division, beneath the temporary experience of partial self divided from its own divine wholeness. Tonight, as you rest in sacred darkness, I invite you to experiment with this radical recognition. Begin by bringing attention not to gradual progression toward expanded awareness, but to awareness itself already expanded beyond all limitation, not to developmental movement toward divine perspective, but to perspective itself already divine in its essential nature, not to evolutionary journey toward unified consciousness, but to consciousness itself already unified in its fundamental reality beyond all temporary appearances of separation, of division, of fragmentation into isolated entities, navigating seemingly independent existences. Feel the difference between approaching awakening as distant achievement and recognizing it as present reality, between viewing enlightenment as future attainment and experiencing it as current revelation, between perceiving ascension as eventual destination and embodying it as immediate demonstration of what has always been true beneath the veil of forgetting, beneath the cloud of unknowing, beneath the temporary identification with limited self rather than unlimited awareness, expressing through particular focus, through specific configuration, through unique demonstration of its own infinite nature. From this recognition, this remembrance of your true identity beyond all temporary selfhood, the ascended life unfolds not as special achievement but as natural expression, not as extraordinary accomplishment but as ordinary demonstration, not as exceptional attainment, but as simple revelation of what you have always been, what you are in this eternal moment, expressing through the miracle of individualized consciousness without sacrificing unity, through the wonder of personal experience, without forsaking universality, through the beauty of specific manifestation, without abandoning infinite potential. As you embody this ascended perspective, certain qualities naturally emerge not as acquired characteristics, but as revealed attributes of your essential nature, recognized, reclaimed, remembered as your authentic identity beyond all temporary appearances, all passing states, all changing conditions mistaken for fundamental reality. First among these qualities is boundless love, not as emotion but as recognition of all beings as expressions of the same consciousness, not as feeling but as knowing of all entities as manifestations of the same awareness, not as sentiment but as direct perception of all creation as varied demonstrations of the same divine essence that constitutes your own true nature, beyond all temporary identification with separate self defined by particular body, by specific personality, by unique history mistaken for essential identity. This love, this recognition of fundamental oneness beneath apparent diversity, dissolves judgment not through moral imperative, but through clear seeing, eliminates criticism not through ethical command, but through expanded understanding, transcends condemnation, not through spiritual dictate, but through direct perception of all creation as perfect unfoldment of the same consciousness expressing through infinite forms, through endless configurations, through boundless manifestations of its own divine nature. Second is perpetual creativity, not as special activity but as natural radiation of your essential identity, not as particular practice, but as continuous expression of your fundamental nature, not as periodic technique, but as constant demonstration of your true being, as the creative principle itself manifesting through individualized focus, without sacrificing universality, through personal expression without forsaking infinity, through specific demonstration without abandoning the boundless potential that constitutes your deepest reality, beyond all limitation, all constriction, all diminishment, through identification with partial rather than complete self. And third is absolute sovereignty, not as power over others, but as authority over personal experience, not as control of external circumstances, but as conscious direction of internal state, not as domination of separate reality, but as deliberate assumption of the consciousness that creates reality through perfect correspondence between the awareness that perceives and the world it experiences, as precise reflection, as exact extension, as perfect manifestation of its own divine nature expressed through individualized focus, without division, through specific configuration without separation, through unique demonstration without fragmentation of the unified field that contains all experience as varied expressions of its own eternal essence. As you drift towards sleep tonight, crossing threshold between waking and dreaming, between conscious and subconscious, between directed and spontaneous creation, embody this ascended perspective with your entire being. Feel how it transforms not just spiritual understanding, but practical experience of existence itself. Feel how it dissolves the fundamental anxiety that accompanies perception of self as separate entity navigating independent reality. Feel how it resolves the basic fear that emerges from identification with isolated consciousness, vulnerable to circumstances perceived as other, as foreign, as potentially threatening to well-being, to security, to the very continuation of personal existence. For when consciousness ascends not through progressive journey, but through immediate recognition of what has always been true beneath all appearances, when awareness awakens not through gradual evolution, but through direct realization of its own divine nature, manifestation transforms from occasional achievement to continuous expression, from periodic demonstration to constant revelation, from special creation to natural radiation of the infinite potential, the boundless creativity, the unlimited love that constitutes the essential reality of what you have always been, what you will always be, what you are in this eternal moment expressing through the miracle of individualized awareness, without sacrificing unity, through the wonder of personal experience without forsaking universality, through the beauty of specific manifestation without abandoning the infinite potential that is your divine inheritance, your eternal essence, your most authentic self revealed through the ascended life lived not as distant possibility, but as present reality, not as future attainment but as immediate demonstration, not as eventual achievement but as current expression of the truth that sets you free, not from external circumstance, but from internal misidentification with anything less than the divine self that is your deepest identity, your truest nature, your most authentic being expressing through the perfect vehicle of human consciousness, awakened to its own unlimited potential, its own boundless creativity, its own infinite capacity for love beyond all limitation, all separation, all division between the Creator and the creation that is in essence, one reality expressing through endless forms, through infinite variations, through eternal demonstration of the truth that manifests as all experience, through the perfect pattern of unwavering assumption maintained until manifestation completes its journey from invisible conception to visible birth, in the realm we call physical reality, but recognize, in awakened perception, as spiritual expression of the divine consciousness, that is the only reality, the singular substance, the absolute truth of what we are beyond all appearances, all conditions, all circumstances perceived not as separate from the awareness, perceiving them but as perfect extensions, as precise reflections, as exact manifestations of that very awareness itself, the ascended life, not distant achievement but present possibility, not future attainment but immediate reality, not eventual destination but eternal truth awaiting only your recognition, your remembrance, your return to the consciousness that has always been your home, your essence, your most authentic self beyond the temporary dream of separation, beyond the passing illusion of division, beyond the momentary experience of fragmentation into isolated entities, navigating seemingly independent existences, rather than individualized expressions of the one consciousness creating all reality, through the perfect law that manifests awareness as experience in exact correspondence, in precise reflection, in perfect demonstration of the state assumed as fundamental identity, beyond all temporary appearances, all passing conditions, all changing circumstances mistaken for essential reality. Rest now in this truth, this recognition, this remembrance, this return to the awareness that has always been your deepest identity beneath the surface fluctuations of consciousness, content mistaken for consciousness itself. Rest as the ocean rests in its depths, undisturbed by the waves that play upon its surface. Rest as the sky rests, unchanged by the clouds that pass through its vastness, for you are that ocean, that sky, the boundless awareness within which all experience arises, through which all reality expresses, as which all manifestation occurs in perfect correspondence to the state assumed as fundamental identity in the ascended life lived not as spiritual achievement, but as natural expression of the truth that has always been, that will always be, that is in this eternal moment the only reality, the singular substance, the absolute essence of what you are beyond all becoming, all developing, all progressing toward what reveals itself in awakened perception as the divine self that has always been your truest nature, your deepest identity, your most authentic being expressing through the miracle of human experience ascended, not through special attainment, but through simple recognition of what has always been, what will forever be the ultimate truth. I am that I am.